The first thing the man did upon returning before the apocalypse was to abandon all of his teammates. Then he pulled out an axe and started firing like crazy. His teammates raised their hands in surrender one after another. But the man didn't hesitate at all, because in this world, there was no one left worth trusting. In his previous life, he was an orphan from a young age, and he faced everything alone no matter what happened, until one day, dungeons appeared everywhere around the world, and countless disasters befell the cities. At the same time, a divine light bestowed power upon many people, and these people could awaken, gaining different skills. At the same time, the global situation also underwent earth-shattering changes. But for Yu Ran, nothing was different. He had long seen through the filth of this world, but at this moment, he seemed to see a ray of light. That man was killing monsters, protecting the weak, asking for nothing in return. He wore a righteous expression and said he would destroy the final boss of the world, saving the world. In that moment, Yu Ran's sense of justice awakened. Going through one monster journey after another, he finally had a team worth sacrificing his life for. Perhaps saving the world with them would also be quite interesting. But when they arrived before the final dungeon gate, he was stabbed in the chest from behind by his old teammate with a sword. It turned out that the other party had long been corrupted by power and glory, and once the dungeon ended, it meant that everything they had would disappear. So not only was Yu Ran harmed, but through other accidents, they had poisoned the entire army they once fought alongside. It turned out that heroes were just tools before power. Yu Ran looked at the true faces of those adulterous scoundrels, regretted it deeply, and then fell. But he originally thought this was the end, but unexpectedly the story had only just begun, and at this moment, dark clouds gathered in the sky, and a red moon appeared. This was the first day the dungeons appeared in the world. But when Yu Ran looked at the job options before him, he was directly stunned. Unexpectedly, this interface had an extra option, darkness. This profession was different from other auspicious lights, and it would distribute all the abilities to each player who chose it. Only when favored by the Dark Apostle could they obtain different skills. As for this profession, it could not only possess curse and poison skills, but it could even summon the dead monsters to fight for them. And in order to make his power even stronger, Yu Ran did not hesitate to choose this option. Just because in his previous life, there was a person called the Death Knight, and all of the guilds working together barely managed to defeat him. And this time, to get revenge, he would transform himself into a demon, to grind that scum Jung Kayan into 1,000 pieces. The next day, Yu Ran went to the Ostrich Guild to register as a hunter, and while he was considering the agreement, the manager took out a few pages of skills. In fact, this was also to test the other party, to see if they were an awakened person in the assessment. But at this moment, Yu Ran discovered a skill called Blood Poison Technique. It could turn the blood in the body into poisonous fluid, although it wasn't powerful on its own, but once combined with the blood magic casting skill, it would become incredibly powerful. Yu Ran didn't think much, and directly tore off this skill page. Following a blue light flashing, it also meant that he had officially joined the guild. A few days later, he immediately received his first dungeon mission, the Goblin Cave. The guild assigned a few extras to participate in this hunt. After hearing the names, Yu Ran scoffed. He had never heard of these people in his previous life. It seemed that he didn't need to pay special attention. After simply learning about the mission process, a blue teleportation gate slowly opened, and on the other side was the dungeon space. Yu Ran examined his surroundings, and based on the scratches on the roots, it seemed that there were many goblins appearing here. The bald guy saw that Yu Ran was new, and directly assigned him the most dangerous scouting task, while Yu Ran before was still a high-level hunter operating on the 7th floor of the dungeon. This was truly a good opportunity for him to act alone. As soon as he left the team, he encountered 3 goblins. Yu Ran scoffed, taking the opportunity to use the goblins to test his blood poison technique. He cut a line on the palm of his hand to poison the dagger, but after a while of fighting, the effect of the level 1 blood poison technique in dealing damage to monsters was limited. Although the goblin's combat style was very simple and quite easy to deal with, but the longer it dragged on, the more would gather. This was also the reason why many novice hunters eventually died at the hands of goblins. In order to quickly end this battle, Yuran took out the goblin prop he had prepared. Due to the suppression effect of the prop, not only could the monsters not approach at all, but they also fell into a state of fear. Before long he had massacred all of these goblins. At this time, he also reached the opportunity to level up, and also obtained the new achievement being stared at. As for the group of 4 extras, who thought that after letting Yuran go to his death, they could divide up all of the dungeon rewards, they had a wrong understanding of their own strength. The bald guy was still surrounded by goblins, and they had to go through all kinds of hardships to barely survive. In the open space, they didn't even dare to continue moving, like a bird startled by the mere sight of a bent twig. Even just a gust of wind was enough to scare them out of their wits. On the other hand, Yuran was recklessly searching for new goblins to kill, so that he could level up quickly. This time finally, he obtained the first powerful skill of the Dark Apostle, Skeleton Soldier. Yuran was extremely excited, and immediately opened the skill book to check. It must be known that this was a growth skill, and the Death Knight in his previous life also relied on this skill to become a dominant force. Without much thought, Yuan directly tore open the skill liquid vial. The current skill isn't strong enough yet. Yuan tried touching the corpse on the ground. A trembling skeleton stood up. It took the small knife and stabbed a few times. The combat power of this undead is still very weak. It seems that improving combat power requires more careful consideration. At the same time, the lackeys who came along were beaten miserably by the goblins. Covered in bandages, they hid in the cave crying. The next second, a level-up notification appeared behind them. The stupid teammates finally understood. That newbie is still fighting. Yuan understood. The best weapon to deal with goblins is himself. He took advantage of the goblins resting late at night. He used firewood to block the cave entrance. Then he threw the torch in his hand down. The light instantly illuminated the sky. The sleeping goblins were startled awake. But faced with the thick smoke and the sealed cave entrance, they could only die screaming. But this wasn't just to level up quickly. It was also to lure out the boss hiding behind. Sure enough, after this operation, the goblin chieftain suddenly emerged from the underground behind. In this beginner dungeon, the giant monster before him was the embodiment of death, but Yuan didn't hesitate, drawing the longsword from his chest, ready to fight. But at this moment, the little skeleton next to him rushed forward, wanting to engage. The little skeleton wobbled, its eyes resolute, holding a tiny toothpick, wanting to compete. The skeleton took a step forward, repeatedly attacking the chieftain's lower body. With a series of seamless actions, Yuan was also surprised to discover the little skeleton's fighting style was exactly like his. Before his rebirth, he had nearly mastered all kinds of weapons. Now the skeleton was like his copy, although its strength was different from his, but relying on its agile movement skills. The little skeleton stabbed its sword into the old monster's head, sending the old monster on its way. Yuan chuckled, originally thinking these undead were a bit useless. It seems he has to change his plan now. And because he cleared the dungeon, the Dark Apostle gifted him a legendary skill page. Yuan sneered. He was one small step closer to success, and at this moment, the guards outside saw that the dungeon had been cleared, and were all shocked by this operation. It only took 1 day to clear it. Perhaps it would break the new clearance record. The group of 4 lackeys finally escaped the nightmare. The person in charge discovered that only 4 people had returned safely, meaning the other person might have died in the dungeon. But at this moment, he heard a voice saying that someone else was coming out. Yuan crossed his arms and walked out extremely stylishly. Without greeting anyone, he left alone. The person in charge hurriedly chased after him, wanting to ask what exactly happened inside. And the bald guy thought it was because he messed up, that he was able to survive. But now it showed that all the monsters in the dungeon were single-handedly dealt with by the man before him. But because of his pride, he and the others in the guild made up a story. The bald guy said that the reason he was injured was because you and this newbie greedily tried to loot items, rushing into the goblins. And he was seriously injured trying to save his life. But Yuan didn't explain anything either. A person like that just happened to be beneficial for him acting alone. To avoid contacting Zhang Kaiyan too early, Yuan's plan was to start with the farthest dungeon. The next day he asked the guild for a dungeon called the Beast Hunter. But because of his poor reputation, No one wanted to team up with him, which coincided with his plan. This time the dungeon was level C, a level C dungeon. If relying solely on his current level, clearing it would be almost impossible. But Yuan had the skeleton soldier skill, so the first monster he chose was an elite monster. Although it was quite difficult to deal with, the remains of this beast would summon a stronger skeleton soldier. At this moment, a beast had launched an attack. Yuan slipped and dodged the opponent's fatal blow. Relying on his body's agility, he performed a Thomas Flare. But the elite monster's defense was too strong, only causing a small scratch. Yuan flashed, again dodging the opponent's powerful attack. Weaving left and right under the monster's feet, his left hand drew a dragon. His right hand drew a rainbow. Attacking like a skyrocket, a few finishing blows, he stylishly turned around. The beastman was unable to move, and could only become a target for others to tear apart. Yuan withdrew his longsword, ending the battle. So this is the first skeleton soldier to appear on the guild side. Two people were having a secret discussion. Looking at the documents the bald guy had given, the man was shocked. This was Yuan's basic information. According to their investigation, the previous dungeon clearance was entirely due to Yuan alone, and now this newly awakened kid had applied for another dungeon. Although the two were calm on the surface, their hearts were already in turmoil. Yuan, on the other hand, was extremely relaxed, because dealing with monsters didn't require him to act at all. But the weakness was that the durability of the summoned skeleton was too low. Yuan jumped down from the rock, lightly touching another ruin. As long as his spiritual power was sufficient, he could summon endless skeletons. This made the beastman very bewildered, watching blankly as a skeleton appeared behind Yuan, its hand filled with black energy, indeed a newly summoned undead. Along with the subordinates constantly grinding, the system also continuously provided new notifications. You have leveled up, all your stats are. The blood poison skill has been upgraded to level 2. However, as the orcs fell, Yuan noticed that the experience points had dropped to 1. This means that he needs to find the boss of this dungeon. Yuan began mapping out the dungeon, studying the situation of the hunters. There was only one place left in the whole dungeon that he hadn't been to. Then Yuan led his followers towards the corner of the map. When they arrived, they found the hunters gnawing on the corpses of their own kind. Yuan was very cautious, lurking in the shadows, preparing a surprise attack. As long as his blood sword could stab into the opponent's body, the chances of victory would greatly increase. Then Yuan signaled to the skeleton soldier to have it draw the opponent's attention. As expected, as soon as it spotted the skeleton, the hunter's eyes turned red, unleashing its full power, charging straight forward. The skeleton also didn't back down, wielding its knife to meet the attack. Their strengths were evenly matched, making it difficult to determine a winner for the time being. The hunter then used its teeth to bite and tear, constantly attacking. While the two were locked in a struggle, Yuan had drawn his bow. Against such thick-skinned monsters, there was only one spot that could break through the defense, and that was the eyeball. Because the opponent was restrained by the skeleton, this arrow was unavoidable. The impact forced the hunter back, unfazed by the injury. It immediately pulled the arrow out. But the poison had already entered its body, and the more dangerous the wound, the faster the spread of the blood poison. Within seconds, the opponent was trembling and unable to stand still. Although the level 2 blood poison skill wasn't very effective, it was enough for the skeleton soldier to gain the upper hand. With a crack, it finished off the monster in front of it. At this moment, the system announced that they had successfully cleared the dungeon. They could return to the city in 1 hour. Looking at the food in the hunter's stomach, Yuan couldn't help but sigh. This thing really eats everything. But right at that moment, Yuan discovered something unusual. Among them, there were corpses with wounds as if they had been slashed by a blade. Years of experience helped Yuan deduce that this was caused by an attack from behind. Moreover, looking at the slash that finished off the opponent in 1 blow, the opponent was definitely an ambush specialist. Perhaps it was due to internal strife within the Firebird Guild over equipment, killing to silence them. With only 1 hour left before leaving the dungeon, Yuan hurried to look for clues everywhere. At this moment, a light in the distance caught Yuan's attention. Unexpectedly, a small narrow cave was hidden nearby. The cave entrance was very small, only allowing one person to pass through. Inside the cave was a skeleton, without any visible wounds, likely having died of starvation. The symbols on the wall were probably to avoid pursuit, hiding here and not daring to go out. Looking at the emblem on the cloak, he couldn't help but sigh. Lei Longwan doesn't even spare the small fry like this. While sorting through things, a book suddenly fell down. Yuran picked it up to look at it. Unexpectedly, it was a blacklist compiled by Lei Longwan. He closed the book and couldn't help but feel this was an unexpected gain. And at this very moment, the system announced the award of a legendary skill, translation. It was just what he needed. Unexpectedly, this time it was the Eye of Anubis skill. The effect is that you can see the skills of the deceased. Yuran didn't think much about it, and tore the skill scroll right away. Everyone says the dead don't reveal secrets. But from now on it won't be like that anymore, because the dead don't lie. Yuran immediately activated the skill. A black aura suddenly rose from his eyes, then turned into a blue light that shot into the skeleton's eyes. In an instant, as the light illuminated the entire realm, all the fragments of memories constantly appeared in Yuran's mind, being betrayed by his teammates, and the whole process of his escape. And this person was none other than Lei Longwan of the Firebird Guild. After casting the magic, Yuran placed the skeleton down, finished. He held his head in great pain. Clearly, peeking into other people's memories also took a great toll on him. But based on these memories and the blacklist, he had the capital to negotiate. As for Longwan, a man being beaten half to death on the ground, it turned out it was because this subordinate, without permission, had let Yuran into the dungeon. You must know that this place, he didn't want others to know about his dark past. Lei Longwan ignored the newspaper in front of him, although before the story of Yuran in the dungeon had been investigated clearly, but due to the bald guy spreading rumors, after his collapse, whether true or false, his reputation had been ruined. After all, he couldn't just continue to wander alone. But the next second, a call from the front desk made Lei Longwan laugh, because Yuran alone again came to his guild to be imprisoned. This was a bewitching tooth. Although it would bring power enhancement, the price was being eroded by desire. And Yuran, wanting to seize this treasure, went alone to Lei Longwan to negotiate. With the blacklist in hand, he also started trading with Lei Longwan. He would hand over the book, and he would also need a slot in the dungeon. This dungeon's challenge is the Dungeon Siege. It was impossible for Yuran to clear it alone. There are 1,000 orcs in the dungeon, plus a chieftain, and also many equipment resources. Therefore, dungeon slots are fiercely contested by guilds. Yuran alone snuck into a corner of the conference room to scout the situation. In his previous life, Yuran didn't participate in this dungeon, but he knew that more than half of the 150 people who participated in the breakthrough would die. This was originally unbelievable. You must know that these players were all the best from each guild, and they also acted in groups. It was impossible to be massacred to this extent by orcs. So, the purpose of this trip isn't just to reach the Abyss Chief. The purpose of this trip isn't just to reach the Abyss Chief, but also to uncover the truth of everything. But even if the one pulling the strings this time is Klung Kai Vyun, he won't take action himself, but will control things from behind. Soon the day to enter the dungeon arrived. The lineup this time is quite powerful, including the Miser Guild where Kai Vyun is, the Firebird Guild, the Lion King Guild, and the Skeleton Guild. As for Yunnan, he also managed to sneak into the group. Due to the large number of people, so no one noticed his presence. After entering the dungeon, just as Yunnan predicted, everyone was scattered into a chaotic mess. At this moment, the beastmen in the dungeon also appeared before everyone. The Miser warriors charged forward first, planting their shields in the ground, while simultaneously activating the unyielding stance skill to provoke the enemy. This move can greatly enhance their own defense. Indeed, under a full-force attack from the beastmen, the man was not hurt at all. This also allows the mages with skills to take the time to cast their spells. Following that, Yu Neiman's younger brother released countless vines, causing the beastmen in front to lose the ability to move. Finally, cooperating with the man's axe, they easily resolved the battle. But as the beastman was dying, it let out a roar. And in the next second the ground suddenly shook. The awakened were startled by this situation, all waited seriously to deal with the upcoming danger. Only a few seconds later, A horde of beastmen rushed out from the forest. In an instant, a fierce battle of blades and swords began. The front row of beastmen suffered a major attack. It turned out all the awakened had taken their positions, simultaneously unleashing spells with amplified power. The warriors also took advantage of the beastmen's stunned state and began to charge at high speed, plunging into the beastmen and continuing the slaughter. As for Yunnan, he did not participate in the battle. He didn't want to waste his time on these beastmen. His goal was to go and find the beastman leader himself. The guild, wanting to clear the dungeon, had to eliminate 1,000 beastmen first, and U9 could take this opportunity to steal equipment first. On the side of the beastman leader, all the beastmen stood in 2 rows. It was clear the group here were all elites. At this time, the chief raised his weapon, letting out a loud shout. The loud roar was clearly cheering. His underlings also raised their weapons, responding in kind. Seeing the elite monsters leave to support the front lines, Yunin chuckled. Now that there were no small monsters around the chief, it was a good time to strike. He was the most cunning person in the dungeon. While other players were desperately dealing with 1,000 small monsters, he decided to go raid the nest alone, because too many frontline beastmen died. Under an order from the chief, his underlings rushed to the front line to assist. Yunin seized this gap, summoning 2 skeleton soldiers, preparing to deal with things first. The chief was full of imposing aura, dragging his large axe without any retreat. Yunin in the distance raised his bow, sending his skeletons to charge forward first. But when the chief entered the battle state, the chief's fangs effect was also triggered. With just one move, he crushed a skeleton in front of him. This kind of attack made Yuan's bow drawing speed slow down by half. The chief began a second wave of attack, but this time the skeleton did not choose a direct confrontation, but relying on the flexibility of its body. It kept moving quickly around the chief's feet. Yunin knew he had to seize these brief few seconds, only by using blood poison to poison the opponent. Would he have a chance to fight? While the chief and the skeletons were in a stalemate, a flying sword tore through the air, reaching the chief in an instant, but unexpectedly, it was blocked by the opponent tilting his body. But the skeleton also seized the opportunity, swinging its blade with all its might at the chief's feet. Who would have thought the opponent's defense would cause the blade in its hand to be directly chopped in half? Then the chief continued to swing his great axe, giving the skeleton in front of him a lesson, and then looked at Yunian with a provocative look. In this situation, continuing to fight was meaningless. Yunnan could only change his tactics and retreat first. It seems that the equipment enhancement in front of him was even stronger than he imagined, and the level 1 dungeon boss was quite arrogant, not chasing after Yunin who had escaped, but acting like nothing had happened and returning to his seat. But just as Yunin was escaping, he was also seen by a member of the Lion King Guild in the forest, whose thoughts were the same as Yunian's. They wanted to secretly kill the boss. But before everyone could react, the leader discovered his teammates had all fallen. It seemed that there was a third wave of enemies hidden here. After a cry of pain, the people of the Lion King Guild all fell. When Yunnan returned to the camp, he found that the atmosphere had become a bit strange. Everyone was silent, extremely pressured, until Yunnan discovered a row of tombstones. He realized that on just the first day, many awakened had died. Yunin also guessed at this point that there must be some dark force assassinating their comrades from behind. But the top priority was to quickly eliminate that chief. Early the next morning, Yunin snuck out alone. Hearing a large commotion in the forest, it seemed a new round of blade and sword battle had begun. Yunan opened his inventory, looking at the items in front of him. Even with skeletons to restrain them, it was still impossible to win. But at this moment, he suddenly had an idea. He had a plan. Very quickly, he once again came with his sword before the chief. The opponent's face was full of anger. Directly activating Chief's fangs and laughing, his anger was sky-high. Like a war god swinging his great axe, he was about to unleash a Noxian guillotine move. But this move was broken by a sword that shot over. It turned out this time Yunnan had changed his strategy. The skeletons acted as archers, while he led the charge with his sword. At this time the chief used his great axe to toss up the rocks and dirt in front of him, attacking the skeletons in the distance. However, the skeletal figure was also extremely agile, running and shooting at the same time. The chieftain had to deal with the attacks, constantly using his axe to defend. Just as the two sides were locked in a stalemate, Yu-Ran had quietly jumped above the chieftain. With a twist of his body, he seemed to be dancing in mid-air. Before the opponent could react, Yu-Ran had pulled out his most important weapon, but this attack was aimed at the tooth worn around the chieftain's neck. Yu-Ran acted swiftly, and the entire piece of equipment was in his hands. In an instant, he felt countless energies hidden within his body, while the chieftain kept receiving notifications that his attack power was weakening and his defense was also weakening. Feeling deceived, the chieftain flew into a rage, madly smashing the ground, but accidentally got hit by an arrow from the skeleton. The arrow hit him, drawing blood and reducing his poison attribute. Yu-Ran, still holding the tooth, grinned. Now that his attributes were stronger than his opponent's, it seemed like killing the opponent was only a matter of time. He first slashed his own hand to soak his sword in poison, then had the skeleton constantly harass the opponent. Having lost his equipment, the beastman was in dire straits. In a flash, Yu-Ran had quickly appeared before him. He dodged the chieftain's large axe attacks, while constantly turning and adjusting his position, finally reaching the top of his head and delivering a fatal blow. The chieftain's attributes decreased even more. In a panic, he threw his weapon, but this move was naturally easily snatched by Yu-Ran as well, and the skeleton was also very powerful, reflexively catching the large axe that was flying towards it. This weapon, compared to the bow and arrow in his hand, seemed much better. Using it to chop heads would definitely be not bad at all. While in the forest not far away, a scout was stunned by the scene before him, that someone dared to challenge the chieftain alone, and judging by the battle, he wasn't at a disadvantage. Who exactly is the man in front of him? He hurriedly turned and left, thinking that he had to report the situation to his guild. But the small stones falling also caught Yu-Ran's attention, and just as the scout was running away, suddenly an arrow shot out from behind, but the one who attacked was not Yu-Ran, but someone from the skeleton guild. This man didn't hesitate at all, directly swinging his sword to end the battle, and adding another name to his blacklist. It turned out that Yu-Ran's actions had also been noticed by the skeleton guild, although Yu-Ran was not on their blacklist. But in order to steal equipment, the two of them had discussed a plan, and then arranged for their newly arrived subordinate to deal with the scout. It was just that they didn't know that Yu-Ran had already secretly seen the scene before him. On another side, the army, having finished off all the small beastmen, were thinking about how to deal with the chieftain next. But who knew the next second, a notification frame appeared before everyone. The beastman chieftain had been defeated, and the dungeon had been cleared. Everyone was shocked. The entire place was in an uproar. And Yu-Ran on this side had also finished off the chieftain, and was looting the equipment. Because the achievement had been reached, he received a new reward. Unexpectedly, upon opening his inventory bag, he discovered that this time he had received the Book of the Dead. It should be known that the drawback of summoning skeletons was that you had to kill a monster first to be able to proceed, but this book could preserve the stats of 5 immortal monsters. This meant that you could still summon on the spot without corpses. Yu-Ran controlled the book in his hand. In a flash, countless black eye covered the skeleton before him. Then a large amount of energy flowed into the book, finally emitting an extremely dazzling light. Unexpectedly, this time the harvest was so great, it was truly wonderful. The skeleton guild also didn't expect that the dungeon would be cleared so quickly. Now it wouldn't be easy to find Yu-Ran either, so they were all discussing that they should first deal with the remaining people on the blacklist. But their subordinate sent to deal with the corpse had not yet returned, and everyone felt that the situation was not good. At this moment, their subordinate came running back from afar in a panic, and behind him were 2 skeleton soldiers chasing after him. Curly Hair was a bit flustered. What was going on? But just as he was thinking, his subordinate had arrived beside him. Taking advantage of the fact that everyone hadn't had time to react, he drew the long sword from his waist. In just an instant, he had swung out dozens of sword slashes in the crowd. Everyone lost their ability to act, and were surrounded by the skeleton soldiers. Yu-Ran took off the outfit he was wearing, very dashing, revealing a smile like a first love. Seeing the other members of his team die tragically before him, the last person clearly knew that Yu Ran had kept him alive definitely to extract information. To keep the secret of assassinating players, this person chose to commit suicide directly. But for Yu Ran this was completely unnecessary, because his level skill, the Eye of Anubis, could directly read the memories of the dead. The dead person in front of him had no secrets at all. As each memory entered Yu Ran's brain, Yu Ran gradually understood the truth of the matter. It turned out that this dungeon operation actually contained an earth-shattering conspiracy, and that the Skeleton Guild was supported by the nation of Japan with their own hands. And the people supporting them were the Sword Saint and Divine Craftsman. These two people in Yu Ran's previous life could be said to be as close as dragon and tiger, and had fought shoulder to shoulder with Yu Ran, and were also his spiritual support. Unexpectedly, Yu Ran ended up missing them. Yu Ran, at this moment, after having understood the truth, was also very calm. A new plan for revenge was gradually forming in his mind. From the memories just now, Yu Ran learned that the next target of the Sword Saint and Divine Craftsman was a dungeon broker named Wu Tan, and that Yu Ran also needed a person like that right now to provide him with dungeons. Since you want to kill him so badly, then I will go against you. In the previous life, I was played by you in the palm of your hand. In this life, watch how I return everything to you all intact. To avoid drawing attention from other guilds, Yu Ran chose to injure himself to leave. Everything went as he anticipated, with his body covered in wounds. The moment he exited the dungeon, he was immediately taken into an ambulance. No one paid him any attention at all. Meanwhile, the other guilds, due to heavy losses in the dungeon, were arguing among themselves, even escalating into physical conflicts. Who exactly hunted the orcs? The city prison became a mystery in an instant. As soon as this news came out, it directly angered Lu Wan, the Firebird Guild's president. To find out what happened in the dungeon, he went to the hospital to question Yu Ran. Little did he know that he was gradually falling into Yu Ran's trap. Yu Ran directly placed all the blame on the Skull Guild, and told Lu Wan about the Skull Guild's plan. He knew that a greedy person like Lai Wanlong would definitely seek trouble with the Skull Guild. This dog-eat-dog situation was exactly what Yu Ran wanted to see. However, Yu Ran still underestimated the cunning of that old fox, Li Wanlong. From the limited information, he analyzed that this Skull Guild was likely an equipment smuggling organization. If he could get a hold of this connection, he himself could make a fortune. But for Yu Ran, that didn't matter, because he had already gotten what he wanted from Lai Wanlong, and that was Wu Can. But Wu Can was indeed a top broker and worked with utmost caution. He directly sent Yu Ran information about a level C dungeon to have him deal with it in order to test Yu Ran's abilities. For the sake of his revenge plan, Yu Ran could only choose to go alone. A dungeon that ordinary people couldn't overcome was as easy as flipping a hand for him. Yu Ran, who had memories of his past life, clearly understood all the secrets and weaknesses of the monsters in this level C dungeon. He finished the dungeon in just half a day. This strength also completely convinced the top broker, Wu Can. At the same time that Yu Ran was clearing the dungeon, Sword Saint and Godsmith were also with the Mizir Guild, calculating the losses in the dungeon. It turned out that the members of the Skull Guild that Yu Ran had killed were actually disciples of these two, and the Mizir Guild, which was originally their partner, couldn't find out the truth. This directly caused a crack in their relationship. On the other side, Lai Wanlong was also vigorously investigating. The Skull Guild seemed to be intentionally drawing their attention. It turned out that this was Li Wanlong's plan. He directly sent 5 bodyguards to Yu Ran to have him participate in a dungeon challenge. This was clearly telling the Skull Guild that the one who killed Sword Saint's disciples was Yu Ran. His purpose in doing this was to lure out the partner behind the Skull Guild. It truly was too insidious. But this despicable plan was exactly what Yu Ran wanted. On the surface, Yu Ran pretended to be innocent and ignorant, but in reality he was already excited inside. The big fish had finally taken the bait. Indeed, the contest between experts is always extremely exciting. Even to compensate Yu Ran, Lai Wanlong even pretended to give Yu Ran an exclusive skill of the Dark Apostle. Unbeknownst to him, this actually helped Yu Ran. The highest level hunter often appears in the guise of prey to satisfy his ambition. Lai Wanlong sent Yu Ran as bait to a level Earth dungeon. But the 5 people responsible for protecting Yu Ran were also two-faced individuals who had also accepted money from both Lai Wanlong and the Nizir Guild, and this dungeon run did not only include his 6 people, but also a group from the Skull Company. All forces were lurking, all wanting to eliminate Yu Ran in the dungeon. Of course, as the mantis stalks the cicada, there's the oriole lurking behind. As soon as they entered the dungeon, everyone scattered. Unbeknownst to them, this was the opportunity for the fishermen, and so Yu Ran and a player named Cheng Su were assigned to the same team. But on the way after they separated, a thick, pungent smell of blood wafted out. After everyone rushed over, they found Cheng Su and Yu Ran lying in pools of blood. Just as the team leader, Zheng Yang, was wondering who had made the move, the ground suddenly shook. Gigantic skeleton warriors appeared behind everyone and instantly eliminated everyone present. It was only at the final moment that Zheng Yang understood that Yu Ran had long known of his plan and just now was merely a performance by Yu Ran. And Yu Ran's goal was even more ruthless than he had imagined. He didn't just want to resolve this issue, but even those skeletons, in his eyes, were the same. Yu Ran was that oriole. At this time, the people of the Skull Guild were still hunting on the other side of the forest, completely unaware that death was about to descend. His name is Yu Ran. After being reborn, he has stepped onto the dark path. For revenge, he will stop at nothing. Anyone who obstructs him will become a ghost under his sword. Right after dealing with Zheng Yang, Yu Ran relied on his past life's memories and found the long arm. It turned out that the level Earth dungeon this time, his parents had also previously cleared, and the condition to pass the first floor was to find the hidden goblin. It just so happened that Yu Ran had participated in this in his past life, so it was easy for him to open the door to the second floor. On the other side of the forest, the members of the Skull Guild were completely unaware that they were being slaughtered and thought that they had been betrayed and hurriedly ran towards the second floor. Just as they stepped into the second floor, Yu Ran's arrows were released, and this time the arrowheads were actually arrows with vaporizing blood. The 5 people were also stunned. This type of arrow basically caused them no damage at all. Just as they were still suspicious, Yu Ran emerged from the operating room, revealing the truth of everything. It turned out that the syringe contained goblin blood, and goblins were the most beloved species of this underground city. While everyone was still in shock, the smell of blood had already begun to spread. It directly awakened the terrifying monster on the second floor. In a roar that tore through the night, a colossal creature burst out of the lake, its mouth wide open like a bloody basin, immediately grabbing the skeleton closest to the lake. The panicked city residents were blocked and immediately lost their breath. In an instant, everyone was scared to death, and this giant monster was the final boss of this D-level dungeon, Warrior 71. We mentioned earlier, Yu Ran shot the syringe containing goblin blood into the skeleton, which normally would have lured out the final boss, Warrior 71, causing this 4-person team to be instantly wiped out. This action directly infuriated Matsumoto on the team. Matsumoto swung his sword and rushed towards Yu Ran, determined to kill the one who had provoked him. This Matsumoto wasn't simple either. The sword in his hand bore the symbol of a sword saint. Yu Ran had experienced a lifetime and immediately recognized this person as a disciple of the sword saint. Thinking of this, Yu Ran became even more excited. The two had barely exchanged blows before they went all out. Matsumoto, as a disciple of the sword saint, was naturally aggressive and reckless. At this moment, just as Matsumoto swung his sword horizontally, Yu Ran seized the opportunity and immediately retreated, while biting his lip, directly smearing a mouthful of poisonous blood onto Matsumoto's face. Seeing that he had been hit by blood poison magic, Matsumoto hurriedly wanted to resolve the crisis, directly unleashing his strongest move, the ultimate skill, Swift Sword. But this skill, due to his lack of practice, left his arm exhausted after activation and could only be used once. Luckily, Matsumoto had enough confidence in this move. After a flash of white light, Yu Ran was sure to die, but reality gave him a painful slap. Yu Ran not only dodged Matsumoto's swift sword, but also ran behind him and kicked him twice, until he fell to the ground. Matsumoto finally recalled what the sword saint had told him. If someone can avoid your swift sword, then you are sure to die at their hands. Seeing Matsumoto meet his end, his teammates anxiously yelled, but the lizard warrior didn't give him a chance to worry about his teammate, directly knocking him away with one blow. Seeing that he was at a disadvantage, Zhang Qi-kun from the team directly begged Yu Ran. This action was met with disdain by the skeleton assassin on the team. It turned out that this Zhang Qi-kun was the one who had hired Jing Yong's team before, a member of the Nicelle Guild. This time he had infiltrated the team. In addition to wanting to deal with Yu Ran to report to the Sword Saint, and the other two, he also wanted to kill Zheng Yong and the others to silence them. But he didn't know that Jing Yong's team had already become Yu Ran's pawns. At this moment, he still thought the witness had betrayed them. Returning to the mainland, he could only join forces with Yu Ran to first eliminate Sai Shi. But he didn't know that Yu Ran had been leveling up all by himself along the way. Just seeing Yu Ran casually wave his hand, 5 giant skeleton warriors ferociously crawled out. They were trying to assassinate me earlier. Why would I cooperate with them? This dungeon is destined to become the burial ground for everyone in the Bone Guild. That's right. The identities of hunter and prey switched in an instant. Zhang Qi-kun was completely panicked at this moment, because death had descended. The 4-person assassin team surrounded Yu Ran, but suffered a crushing defeat and were counter-killed. At this moment only Zhang Qi-kun was left on the field to survive. He had no choice but to suggest a truce with Yu Ran. But what he received in return was Yu Ran's skeleton army. The scene before him directly stunned Zhang Kun. No wonder Yu Ran could single-handedly clear dungeons time and time again. It turned out he had this killer move. The next second, the skeleton soldiers directly charged towards the lizard warrior, their movements agile as if they had been trained for a long time, once again refreshing Zhang Qi-kun's perception of the world. What frightened him the most was this type of skeleton soldier. There were still as many as 5 of them. Right now only running and hiding could save him from this calamity. But just as he turned to leave, he was shocked to discover that the lizard warrior completely ignored the counterattack of the skeleton soldiers and was only chasing him. It seemed that in the eyes of the lizard warrior, only he was the enemy. Without time to think, he could only constantly dodge. Yu Ran, standing far away, sneered. This just happened to become his bait, making it convenient for him to kill his prey. It turned out that the lizard warrior's eyes were very special, like thermal imaging, only able to detect living beings, and unable to see the skeleton soldiers at all. Before Zhang could continue to run, a blade of light appeared before his eyes, directly cutting him to the ground, leaving him unable to move. And the lizard warrior behind him also caught up at this time. This dark apostle profession is truly abnormal. Before long, the huge lizard warrior was cut down to the ground by Yu Ran's skeleton soldiers, and his attributes instantly increased. At this moment Yu Ran was pleasantly surprised to find that the boss had dropped an orange piece of equipment. Taking a closer look, it turned out to be the ironclad turtle divine blade. Yu Ran still remembered that this weapon in his previous life was an accessory of the Sword Saint, and now it was in his hands. Thinking of this, Yu Ran showed a bit of disdain, directly granting the weapon to a skeleton soldier next to him. It seems that Yu Ran was extremely disgusted with the Sword Saint and the God Craftsman, those two from that small country. After clearing the dungeon, Yu Ran realized that a listening device had been installed behind the base's TV. Seeing this scene, Yu Ran immediately thought it must have been done by people from the collapsed Bone Guild. So he took out his phone and pretended to call Lai Rongwan, reporting that his mission had been completed. It seems that this time Yu Ran plans to use a counter scheme, directly using a scheme to divert trouble, to start a war between the 3 major guilds. Right after resolving that matter, Yu Ran arrived at a certain location. Turns out, this place held the list of dungeons Wukan had given Yu Ran. Flipping through the list in his hand, Yu Ran also gradually came to understand Wukan as a person, and just then, a piece of news astonished Yu Ran. It was the egg of the white flower lizard. He remembered very clearly, this mysterious item, in his past life, had fallen into the hands of the Nissa Guild. And this egg had always been an absolute secret. Even Yu Ran didn't know its significance. And coincidentally, Yu Ran had discovered this information. Therefore, this time Yu Ran must take the dungeon first, because This will be a crucial clue to unraveling the secret of the masked Kayan. In the Apocalypse, the Dark Apostle class is definitely an overpowered existence. Dungeons that others have to clear together, he can rely on himself to independently defeat the boss. Just because of the skeleton summoning skill, it's simply made specifically for our male lead. After dealing with the Lizard Warrior and a group of assassins from the Skeleton Guild, Yuran also began his first collaboration with Wukan. His target this time is in a grade dungeon, a place that not only has rich equipment and experience, but also a crucial mysterious item, the egg of the white flower lizard. Yuran originally intended to act alone, but Wukan basically didn't give him that chance. After all, this was the first collaboration between the two of them. As a top broker, how could Wukan trust Yuran? Therefore, he sent his subordinate Snake89, with the beautiful name of Yuran's auditor, in reality to monitor Yuran. But this person turned out to be of great use to Yuran, because based on his memories from his past life, Yuran remembered clearly. Line out. Possessed the Styx River Stop Foot skill, a lucky player who obtained this skill. Even if his grave is dug up, he can still resurrect. Simply put, he's immortal. The two of them entered the dungeon. Snake89 immediately sat down to eat and drink, occasionally teasing Yuran. Indeed, the minds of gluttons are simple. Snake89 at this time had absolutely no idea that this dungeon trip would become his nightmare. The immortal player Snake89, combined with Yuran, who can summon skeleton soldiers, is definitely the perfect duo. When he saw Yuran summon skeleton soldiers and take care of the guards in front of them, he himself was very surprised, because in his perception, skeleton soldiers are just a type of walking lackey without any skills. But Yuran's skeleton soldiers are like high-level players, which made him become wary. But Snake89 is no ordinary person, completely unaccustomed to Yuran's arrogance, wanting to test his strength. But how could he know that Yuran had already lived a past life, and his movement and skills were top-tier player level? Even Yuran had previously killed Snake89 3 times for the Nissa Guild. Of course, in this life, Yuran will not make the same mistake. At this time, Snake89 approached Yuran, wanting to throw a surprise punch. As a result, he was immediately flipped face first by Yuran. Even Yuran didn't move an inch, let alone the insects, especially since there are 5 of them. Just like that, Yuran hung him up in a tree. For a glutton, the biggest horror is going hungry. After being hungry for a few hours, Snake89 had also completely compromised, thinking that Yuran would ask him for some information, but as it turned out, Yuran didn't want to know, but wanted to use him as bait to attract a large number of Ice King wolves. Right when Snake89 was being attacked by Ice King wolves, Yuran's skeleton soldiers also went into battle, raising their swords and slashing as if chopping wood to retaliate. In an instant, they struck the ice wolves, scattering them like dogs without a home, while Yuran just stood on a tree branch watching everything, madly improving his essence. After dealing with everything, Snake89 was tired to the point of being breathless. At this time, he also truly understood Yuran's ruthlessness. I dare say that this immortality skill is definitely the last skill Snake89 would use. After meeting Yuran, he has completely become a fat bait to attract fire. Countless ice wolves were drawn to his side and slaughtered each other, while Yuran stood on the tree leisurely enjoying the experience. The entire battlefield relied only on the 5 skeleton soldiers he summoned to fight. Seeing this, Snake89 was also extremely disgruntled. There's no other way, who told him he couldn't beat Yuran? But Snake89 also admitted he knew very well, each time Yuran lured ice wolves, the numbers were never fatal. Furthermore, each time he precisely calculated his stamina recovery time to carry out operations. This made Snake89 look at Yuran in a new light. Of course, while he was thinking about all this, Yuran was also observing him, because Snake89 in his past life was a person with considerable strength. Even Yuran didn't dare to provoke him easily. Completely different from his knave appearance now. It seems this change must be related to Wukan, and wanting to deal with Wukan's Skeleton Guild and the Nizal Guild cannot be separated either. Right when the two of them were still suspecting and pondering, the ice wolves on the first floor were all dealt with. The two of them smoothly arrived at the second floor. Without waiting for Snake89 to rest, Yuran took out from his pocket a blood-stained pearl, threw it on the ground, instantly leading out the dungeon boss, the white flower lizard. It seems this white flower lizard has basic attributes similar to the lizard warrior before. While the two of them were arguing about the boss, Wukan outside the dungeon was already preparing the next dungeon for the two of them. The skeleton soldiers Yu Ran summoned not only perfectly inherit his attack skills, but even his personality was copied. It's so pitiful for Snake89, who relied on his immortality to become Yu Ran's meat shield. Even the skeleton soldiers see him as bait, being chased around the map by the white flower lizard. But Snake89's legendary skill, Blessing of the River Styx, is truly amazing. Just a second ago, he was seriously injured by an albino lizard, and the next second, he's restored to his best condition. Enraged, Snake89 throws a punch, venting all his anger on the albino lizard. Unexpectedly, the skeleton soldier behind them looks exactly like Yu Ran. Turns out he was hiding behind, benefiting, waiting for the opportune moment to swing his sword and kill the lizard, stealing the boss's head. This move leaves Snake89 dumbfounded. Fortunately, the trouble is resolved, and Snake89 no longer needs to run around the map. And Yu Ran, because of successfully killing the boss, receives praise from the Dark Apostle and receives numerous rewards. But John George, who is farming monsters on another map, is not so lucky. In his previous life, thanks to the advantage of being a Dark Apostle, he had become the king of the undead. But Yu Ran's appearance in this life has made everything he achieved in his previous life almost fall apart. It's hard to say whether it's his tragedy or Yu Ran's luck. As for Yu Ran, this boss has been eliminated, but for him, this dungeon is not over yet, because there is still an important item to obtain. That is the albino lizard's egg, a mysterious item. What secrets does the albino lizard egg hold? In his previous life, Yu Ran couldn't solve the riddle, but in this life, while dodging, Yu Ran patted the albino lizard's belly, and a glowing egg landed neatly in Yu Ran's hand. The next second, Yu Ran directly used a simple brute force method and smashed the eggshell. And what was inside the eggshell shocked Yu Ran. It wasn't a creature, but a skill page. Holding the skill page, Yu Ran sinks into painful memories. It turns out, this legendary skill is called Apophysis Omnipotence, and it makes the user immune to all toxins. Yu Ran remembers clearly. In his previous life, a person named King Colossus obtained this skill. This man was extremely vicious, and many innocent players were brutally killed by him. During the process of conquering him, many of his teammates sacrificed their lives at his hands. Thinking of this, Yu Ran understands the truth. In his previous life, this egg was originally in the hands of the Muzzer Guild, so that means it must be the Muzzer Guild. Deliberately created a Poison King villain character, and then played the role of a savior to eliminate him. This move is truly insidious. But because Yu Ran got this thing here, the plan of that hypocrite Kaiyun seems destined to fall apart. Thinking of this, Yu Ran doesn't hesitate to hide the skill, and directly chooses to learn this legendary skill. Looking at him now, it can be said that he is a combination of the Undead King and the Poison King, and his strength has greatly increased. Soon after the two leave the dungeon, Wu Tai also brings Yu Ran another important piece of news, that the Golden Dragon has appeared. Yu Ran understands, in his previous life, people initially didn't understand the purpose of the Golden Dragon, only caring about the dragon skin. But what truly changed history was the Golden Dragon's location. It could lift the curse seal, a great effect, which can be considered priceless. In this life, Yu Ran must quickly obtain it before everyone knows this secret, the path. And Wu Tai basically doesn't know Yu Ran's intentions, and has registered Lizunia and Yu Ran to participate in the Aegea dungeon. He even gives Yu Ran an irresistible condition. Just how terrifying is the Aegea dungeon? No one has ever survived it. The true serpent boss inside is even more of a nightmare for players. The major guilds have all announced that they will give up on entering this dungeon. Helpless, the government could only open it to foreign countries, which also created convenient conditions for Yu Ran and Li Zhenia's actions. To prevent Yu Ran from refusing, Wu Tai gave Yu Ran a legendary equipment, the Death Mask, and this equipment is completely custom-made for Yu Ran. Even the Undead King in his previous life, John George, couldn't obtain this equipment. This condition basically makes it impossible for Yu Ran to refuse. So the two disguised themselves as foreigners to infiltrate the True Serpent dungeon this time. As soon as they enter the dungeon, everyone receives a mission to survive 5 days on the first floor. The survival mission seems simple, but in reality it is full of dangers. This shows that the monsters on the first floor are frighteningly numerous. Only if players team up can they survive longer. But at this time, Yuran and Li Zhenya separate from the group because Yuran wants to test the power of the death mask first. Going to a secluded place, Yuran casually summons a skeleton soldier. At this time, the skeleton soldier has changed compared to before, perhaps to enhance their defense. Yuran has equipped them with armor. Just as Li Zhenya and the skeleton soldier are fooling around, Yuran puts on this legendary equipment. This equipment is indeed top-notch. After Yuran puts it on, a string appears immediately that only he can see, and this string is the weapon that connects him and his skeleton soldier. In other words, he can freely switch between the skeleton soldier and his own body. He can now hide and control the skeleton soldier remotely. Now that he knows its function, the next step is to practice until he's proficient. The death mask, although it's a top-notch equipment, controlling it is not easy either. But this doesn't stump our protagonist. In less than a day, Yuran can easily control the skeleton soldier to kill enemies, and his combat power directly increases several times. Even in the connected state, he can also use the skill to summon skeleton soldiers. It's just that doing so has a drawback. That is the spiritual power consumed is 3 times that of summoning with his main body, and he cannot use poison techniques. But even so, it is still a powerful equipment. At the same time, the Kirin Guild is trying to survive in the dungeon. They gathered all the other players, forming a defensive and offensive alliance. Thanks to their numerical advantage, they easily escaped the dungeon. However, this situation lasted for 3 days, and then everyone noticed something was amiss. Although they were continuously eliminating monsters, the numbers were too small. There was absolutely no dangerous situation as expected. So everyone suggested going to other areas to scout. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the number of beastmen corpses on the ground increased, completely shocking the unicorn team. Needless to say, this was definitely caused by Yuran and Li Zhenya. But the panicking unicorn members were completely unaware. However, what appeared next was even more shocking. A massive maze appeared before everyone's eyes. Other people entered dungeons to fight monsters and level up, but our male protagonist, Yuran, ran into the deep forest to chop wood. Do you think he's copying the bald guy, Sipeng? Actually, that's not it. While the unicorn gang was busy fighting monsters, Yuran had already used the wood to set up his traps. Based on his experience from his previous life, Yuran knew clearly this was the simplest and most energy-efficient way to fight monsters. Overall, the traps Yuran set up were not ordinary either. Even Zhuge Kongming would have praised them as being too amazing. The area was vast, like a maze, easily dispersing the beastmen for elimination with extremely high efficiency. In just one day, Yuran leveled up several times. Even the Shadow Envoy was pleased with Yuran's rapid progress and gifted him a legendary skill. This skill could not only enhance the combat power of the skeleton soldiers, but also increase the number of skeleton soldiers summoned. After obtaining this skill, Yuran immediately led Li Zhenya away from the trap, because by now he was strong enough and didn't need traps to aid him in battle. As a warrior, Li Zhenya was also extremely excited at this time. Compared to using schemes, he preferred facing his enemies head-on. But after a few days of contact, Li had been completely conquered by Yuran's strength and scheming. But what Yuran wanted was not just that, but to quickly train him up, because in his path of revenge, Li Zhenya's role was extremely important. Other people were fighting in the dungeon, while Yuran was farming monsters all over the map, because he had to quickly level up to carry out his revenge plan. On the last day of the survival instance, Yuran had also reached level 30. At this time, the Shadow Envoy gifted him another golden skill, Exploding Corpse. Yuran remembered very clearly, this skill was one of the main skills of the previous life's Corpse King. As long as spiritual power was poured into the corpse, it could be detonated at will with terrifying power. Having obtained this skill, the preparations for killing the true snake boss were also almost complete. At the other end of the forest, the unicorn gang was now summoning everyone to assign tasks. It turned out that besides Yuran and Li Zhenya, the other players had all formed a temporary alliance with the unicorn gang with a red armband on their arms. The purpose of gathering was to divide the order of attacking the boss. When the second level opens, everyone immediately gets into position and immediately launches a full-scale attack on the boss. It seemed to be carefully arranged. Faced with attacks from multiple directions, True Snake also roared in anger. And Li Zhenya, who was watching the show on the side, became worried. He asked Yu Ran why he wasn't attacking, fearing that the boss would be snatched away by the people below, but Yu Ran calmly told Zhenya they could not possibly kill the True Snake, because only Yu Ran, who had been reborn, could know how terrifying the final monster, called the Death Snake, actually was, and the players below would later become its sacrifices. Yu Ran, who preferred to act alone, led Li Zhenya to stand on the cliff, coldly watching the players jointly attack the True Snake boss. And all of this seemed to be within Yu Ran's plan. As for the bespectacled guy from the Unicorn Gang below, he was still commanding everyone to attack together, and even very confident in his command actions. After all this time they had gathered many foreign players, perhaps blinded by fame and fortune, the True Snake boss, if it was as easy to kill as he imagined, it wouldn't be called the Death Snake. Faced with attacks from all sides, True Snake dodged in all directions. Seeing this, the bespectacled guy immediately arranged for the mages to launch the traps they had planned in advance. In order to hinder the mages' attacks, combined with defensive shields, the seamless cooperation also made everyone full of fighting spirit. At this time, the bespectacled guy was also full of confidence, continuously commanding to increase the frequency of attacks. It seemed like the dawn of victory was right in front of them, and all of this was observed by Yu Ran from afar. But Yu Ran knew clearly, the True Snake could not be killed so easily, because until now, it had not counterattacked to its heart's content. Before everyone could think about it, True Snake had reached the center of the forest. Its huge body had encircled everyone into a circle. Looking at the small people like ants, True Snake roared angrily. The spikes on its back also began to swell. Seeing this, the bespectacled guy was shocked. But before everyone could react, the spikes shot out like rockets towards the crowd. But what was unexpected was, although the shape and attack range of the spikes were large, it was also very easy for players to dodge them. But what they didn't expect was, the real killer was not these spikes at all. The elite players from the combined nations who were besieging the True Snake boss did not expect that they had already become the True Snake's prey. Faced with attacks from all sides, True Snake did not attack but retreated until it reached the center of the crowd. It released all the spikes on its body, shooting them out at the same time. The combat operation was indeed very skilled, but this was still not the most deadly thing. Although the spikes that True Snake shot out had a large range, but it didn't do much damage. Although the players present were all doubtful, they couldn't worry about much at this time. The urgent matter at hand was to kill the real snake. Just as everyone charged towards the real snake together, a warrior suddenly collapsed to the ground and died a few seconds later. After that, other warriors also began to show abnormal signs. Their mouths started to bleed poisonous blood, along with a series of notifications from the system. Most players had been poisoned by the real snake, and the ones most severely affected were the warriors. Could it be that the real snake's venom contained an extremely potent toxin? This thought was immediately dismissed by Yu Ran, because the physical strength of the warriors was higher than that of the mages and archers in the back line, so it was impossible for them to be the first to fall. Then the problem must lie with the real snake. That's right, the real snake was releasing poison through those small holes. Moreover, it was colorless and odorless. Ordinary players who encountered it would basically only have death waiting for them. But for Yu Ran this was not a problem at all, because he had received Apophyse's omnipotence from the white flower lizard, which gave him the ability to resist all poisons. Thinking of this, Yu Ran gave a sly smile, because it was time for him to appear. After reaching the battlefield, Yu Ran was surprised to discover there were many long spear weapons scattered on the ground. Then Yu Ran began to collect everything into his backpack, because he knew that the real snake skin was very thick, and ordinary short weapons could not pierce its snake skin at all, so they could only use a special method. The real snake boss was worthy of its title as the Death Snake. Not only did it have high attack power, but its intelligence was also a cut above others. Hundreds of players surrounded and attacked it, but they almost had their entire team wiped out. At this time, among the players participating in the siege, only the bespectacled guy was still leading, with less than 30 survivors. Just as they were running to the safe zone in the distance, they suddenly heard the real snake's mournful cry. Then they discovered that someone, disregarding the poison gas, was fighting with the real snake. At this time, the bespectacled guy was convinced that the poison gas had dissipated. Otherwise, no one would dare to appear in that area. To salvage their losses, he could only order everyone to turn back. But he didn't know that the poison gas was still there. It was just that Yuran was too abnormal. After activating Apophyse's omnipotence, Yuran was already immune to all poisons, and even his blood poison technique was enhanced. Yuran continued to use his harassment tactics, with skeleton soldiers firing arrows to attract the real snake's attention, while he alone stepped on the snake's body and ran towards the real snake's head. Seeing the provocation of the skeleton soldiers, the real snake became enraged and directly flew towards it, completely ignoring Yuran behind it. Yuran, holding two long spears, in a moment arrived in front of the real snake's head, raised the long spears and stabbed into the holes of the real snake. That's right, this was Yuran's plan, to use the holes to unleash his blood poison technique. This was definitely the most direct and effective method. After one attack, Yuran didn't engage further and directly ran away into the distance because he knew that this level of damage could only weaken the real snake's abilities and could not kill it at all. Therefore, before coming, he had arranged for Lysenia to transport the corpses of the beastmen. That's right, he was planning to use the corpse explosion technique he had just learned to kill it. Just as the real snake angrily chased after Yuran, a high-level operation by Yuran directly dazzled the entire crowd. He first used the death mask and connected to a skeleton soldier, and once again arrived behind the real snake and stabbed the long spear that had already been smeared with blood poison. And this was still not the end. Then he connected with another skeleton soldier, using the same technique to attack the real snake. At this time, the real snake's openings were completely exposed, and the skeleton soldiers in the distance wanted to come and support him, but it was too late. Yuran then directly controlled the skeleton soldier in the distance and threw the long spear out, then quickly disconnected the connection and reconnected to the skeleton soldier on the snake's back and pulled it down. This level of judgment could be called a divine operation, and Yuran's next action made Zhenya in the distance even more shocked. The real snake, with long spears embedded all over its body, angrily charged straight towards Yuran, but Yuran gave a cold laugh and directly detonated the corpses that had been buried in ambush beforehand. The real snake was also very smart. It turned around and changed direction, wanting to attack from other locations. But this time its opponent was Yuran, and he had already laid corpses all over every path. Very quickly, the real snake was chased by Yuran to his intended destination. At this time, the blood poison technique had covered the entire real snake. Its body was full of wounds. Its whole body was emitting black smoke, and it had completely lost its initial arrogance, because in Yuran's eyes it was already dead. The real snake that hundreds of players couldn't defeat was single-handedly killed by Yuran. Just now, a group of remnants from the Kulin Guild were on their way to the battlefield when the system suddenly notified them that the real snake had been killed. This sudden news shocked everyone, but everyone was still unwilling to give up because the real snake's entire body was a treasure. Even if they got a piece of the snake's skin, this dungeon trip wouldn't be a complete loss. But at this moment, the scene before their eyes directly shattered everyone's hopes completely. After killing the real snake, Yuran's attributes were all greatly increased. Besides the mastery experience rewarded by the system, Yuran also received an important notification, which was that he found the yellow dragon wish pearl in the real snake's body. But this thing had thick skin and fat flesh, and it would be absolutely difficult for ordinary players to take it out. But Yuran had already planned everything out, and he directly placed his hand on the real snake's body and activated the skeleton summoning technique. That's right, he wanted to summon the real snake as his undead legion. Along with a loud explosion, the snake's skin peeled off, and a huge real snake skeleton rose from the ground, and the yellow dragon wish pearl inside its body also appeared before everyone's eyes. The bespectacled guy in the distance was completely stunned, but because of his greed, He still wanted to go forward and snatch it? But he didn't know that Li Zenya had already brought the skeleton soldiers here to block them. How could Yu Ran's secret be known to outsiders? Looking at Yu Ran's side. Although the corpse of the serpent was used by him with summoning magic, it was powerless due to the low level. When half of it was summoned, the system suddenly announced failure. The giant skeleton collapsed in an instant, and the royal dragon in the body, like a medicinal herb, also fell down. But Yu Ran was not disappointed, because the purpose of his trip had been achieved. Holding the legendary equipment in his hand, Yu Ran and Li Zenya left the dungeon. To avoid trouble, Wuken had already arranged everything for the two of them, and even told Yu Ran a shocking news, that Li Longwan's guard team had been tragically wiped out on the 4th floor of the dungeon. And then the culprit, according to Wu Can's guess, was very likely caused by spies from the Skeleton Guild. It seems that during the time Yu Ran was challenging the dungeon, there were already undercurrents rising outside. After clearing the Serpent Dungeon, Yu Ran and Li Zenya had naturally become famous. It's just that except for Wu Can, no one yet knew their true identities. But this was very beneficial for Yu Ran. In the future he could take advantage of this identity to enter and exit the large dungeons. As for Wu Can, in order to continue cooperating with Yu Ran, he had also arranged everything properly for him. It can't be denied that Wu Can was indeed a highly skilled manipulator. With a few operations, he directly shifted public opinion to the Miser Guild. But at this time, the Miser Guild had no time to care about these things, because they were already in chaos internally. First, the Skeleton Guild did not report to the Miser Guild, and assassinated the guard team of La Man from the Firebird Guild, which also caused the dissatisfaction of those in the Miser Guild, because their transaction was inherently unjust. The hypocritical mask of Miser must absolutely not be known to the world. As for the Sword Saint of the Skeleton Guild and Shen Gong, they were not kind people either. Their disciples were killed time and time again. How could they just let it go? If the Miser Guild didn't want to deal with it, the two sides could only break up. Looking at the Firebird Guild side, after learning that their guard team was wiped out, Ling Luan was determined to fight the Skeleton Guild to the death. It seems that Yu Ran's plan had begun to work, and at this moment, Yu Ran gave Li Longwan a crazy idea that he would join Li Longwan's guard team, becoming a hunting dog of the Firebird Guild, but eliminate the guild's enemies. Originally wanting to win Yu Ran over, Li Longwan directly agreed. Yu Ran even thought he had gained a great bargain. But he didn't know that Yu Ran had originally wanted to find a scapegoat for his future actions, because the real hunt was about to begin. The number of people entering the normal level C dungeon was as high as 61, including members of both the Skeleton Guild and the Miser Guild, and even some players used fake information to enter. It was clear this was a place for killing. Knowing it was a trap, Yu Ran still chose to participate, partly because he had just become a confidant of Li Lianwan and was forced to do so, and partly because he wanted to scheme for the lives of others. This was originally what Yu Ran wanted, so Yu Ran found Wu Can to create a fake identity for himself and set off alone. But right at the intersection of the dungeon, Yu Ran discovered a notable figure, Yang Qiaixu. This person had good strength, but his intelligence was not high. A typical power-wielding brute. But he relied on his own strength to score points, to advance to become the Miser Guild's shining knight. And this organization only allowed players who owned the legendary Arthur equipment to join. And in the later stages, it became the regular army of Song Xinghui, who was also Jiang Qian's lackey. According to the memories of his past life, at this time Yang Qiaixu should be wearing legendary equipment, representing high value, and was extremely difficult to deal with. To further increase safety, Yu Ran took out the proficiency points he obtained in the Serpent Dungeon and directly chose to upgrade the Skeleton Warrior Master skill to further increase safety for the upcoming hunt. As soon as they entered the dungeon, everyone received a mission, but at this time, the attention of the Skeleton Guild and the Miser Guild was all here. Although they had parted ways, their ultimate goal was only one, and that was to eliminate Yu Ran. But Yu Ran at this time had also targeted them. In a corner of the first floor of the dungeon, Yu Ran led the attack on the Skeleton Guild. Although these players had strength, they were still not good enough in Yu Ran's eyes. While the two sides were fighting, A player hiding behind a tree had discovered everything, and this person was the interface of the Skeleton Guild, planted in other guilds. The purpose of Zixing was to gather information, but unexpectedly the next second, Yuran appeared like death behind him. Even this player still did not admit his relationship with the Skeleton Guild, but for Yuran, only the dead told the truth. Just how terrifying was Yuran's strength that made the two major guilds simultaneously send elite players to carry out a hunt. In less than one day, all the members of the Skeleton Guild were wiped out by Yuran. As night fell, Yang Chixu was also full of doubts. Since entering the dungeon, he had not found any trace of Yuran, and even the people of the Skeleton Guild were nowhere to be seen. But he didn't know that the Skeleton Guild had already become Yuran's ghosts, and they would also closely follow in their footsteps, becoming the next corpses. In order to quickly complete the mission, early the next morning, everyone began to search for Yuran's whereabouts, but at this moment, everyone was suddenly attacked. Turning their heads to look, it turned out to be Yuran making a move. Looking at the skeleton soldiers surrounding them, everyone was not panicked, only because they simply didn't understand the power of the skeleton soldiers. But the next second, the skeleton soldiers directly launched an attack. Its agile movements surprised everyone. After dodging a blow from Yang Chixu, the skeleton soldier directly rushed towards the group behind him. Because facing this pervert, Yuran had to take action himself. In the next second, Yuran charged towards Yang Chixu with his greatsword. The two immediately engaged in battle. And Yang Chixu was indeed worthy of being called a Knight of the Round Table, wielding his greatsword, easily blocking Yuran's killing blow. At the same time, both Yang Chixu and Yuran received a notification from the system. Their confrontation was also noticed by a strong light. They both knew very well. This notification was not something a normal battle could achieve. This also showed that the two were evenly matched in strength. Thinking of this, Yuran also began to get serious. He casually summoned other skeleton soldiers, and this earth-shattering battle officially began. He was the strongest enemy Yuran had encountered since his rebirth. Wielding the legendary Arthur equipment, Gawain's necklace, further solidified his position as a Knight of the Round Table. It was a pity his strength did not match his intelligence. Yuran remembered, this person in his previous life even had the title of teammate killer, precisely because he had no sense of teamwork. He had caused his teammates to fall into danger many times. And at this moment, Yuran was taking advantage of his weakness, attracting his attention himself, while the other skeleton soldiers bypassed Yang Chixu to go and surround the other players. In just a few rounds, players began to get injured. Seeing that Yuran was toying with him, Yang Chixu was furious and immediately activated the exclusive skill of Gawain's necklace, Protection of the Sun. His combat power increased several times. Wielding the greatsword in his hand, he slashed two skeleton warriors to the ground. The legendary Arthur equipment was indeed powerful, but Yuran still had another plan. When he shouted a retreat, the skeleton warriors turned and fled in all directions, and he himself also turned and ran away. At this time, Yang Chixu thought that Yuran was afraid of him, so he abandoned his teammates and chased after Yuran. But he didn't know that Yuran had long seen through him. On the way to chase him, Yuran chose the right moment to cast explosion technique, causing the goblin under Yang Chixu's feet to explode. The loud explosion attracted the attention of his teammates. But at this time they couldn't even deal with the skeleton soldiers, so they couldn't come to help at all. After the smoke cleared, Yang Chixu was extremely angry and immediately activated speed again to charge at Yuran. Just as the greatsword in his hand was about to hit Yuran, Yang Chixu's foot suddenly faltered, and he fell straight into a trap. Following the sound of an explosion, the other skeleton soldiers had also completed their mission of annihilation and returned to Yuran's side. Yang Chixu at this time was only angry, completely unaware of what Yuran was doing. At this time, Yuran didn't rush to take action, but patiently told Yang Chixu his plan. Yang Chixu was simple-minded, even though he understood Yuran's tactics. He didn't know that Yuran was actually stalling for time, waiting for his knight equipment status to disappear. The Round Table Knight Yang Chixu's strength was indeed powerful, and he was hit by Yuran's explosion technique many times, but he could still stand his ground. It was just that his mind wasn't very good. His intelligence was completely crushed by Yuran. Seeing that his buff was about to disappear, Yang Chixu angrily jumped out of the pit and activated speed to slash at Yu Ran. But the next second, a large sword blocked him. The pitiful Yang Chixu perhaps still hadn't understood the current situation. Yu Ran had 12 skeleton warriors beside him. If he wanted to attack their master, he should ask the sword in his hand first. Yang Chixu, as a knight of the Round Table, wasn't weak in strength himself, and turned around to fight Yu Ran's skeleton warriors. This battle could be said to be earth-shattering. Until the final moment, only 2 of the 12 skeleton soldiers remained on the field, which also showed Yang Chixu's strength, but Yu Ran was too abnormal. The skeleton soldiers he summoned were like a hack. At this time, Yang Chixu was clearly exhausted and could only grit his teeth and persevere. But at this time he also realized Yu Ran's strength. But his whole body was poisoned with blood, so he had no strength to resist. Finally, Yu Ran's remaining 2 skeleton soldiers attacked from both sides, and after a flurry of blades and swords, the research knight from the Nissel Guild finally fell. Therefore, the Dark Apostle also rewarded Yu Ran this time, and his skeleton soldier summoning skill directly increased by 1 level. After picking up the necklace on Yang Chixu's chest, Yu Ran was very satisfied with this legendary Arthur equipment. Its stats were truly perverted. Without taking the time to examine it closely, Yu Ran immediately put it away, because at this moment, he had something more important to do. The Dark Apostle, Yu Ran was wary of the Knight of the Round Table, looked up, and directly opened his Anubis eyes at him. Memories of the past like fragments rushed back into Yu Ran. The Doc Zhang Kaiyan's face made him gnash his teeth even more. To get revenge, I must speed up. At the same time, Wukan had sent Lai Zunya to the dungeon gate to welcome Yu Ran. But this was not some so-called revolution, but Wukan had other purposes. One was to find out what happened to Yu Ran in the dungeon, to clarify who Yu Ran's enemy was. 2 was to bring Yu Ran information about a dungeon, hoping he could go there with Lai Zenya. Regardless of the reason, Wukan only had one purpose, which was to use Yu Ran to confront the Nissel Guild. Yu Ran had lived 2 lives. How could he not see through Wukan's intentions? Thinking of this, Yu Ran decisively agreed. After returning, Yu Ran looked at the information for the step dungeon in his hand. He remembered it was in this dungeon in his previous life that he joined the Knighten Guild. And at this moment, Wukan's information interrupted Yu Ran. It has to be said, Wukan was indeed very resourceful. In such a short time, he had already resolved the dungeon spirit. As for Yu Ran this time, just use the same foreign identity as before, and we can get in. Early the next morning, Yu Ran disguised himself and went with Lai Zenya to the dungeon wharf to gather. Lai Zenya was still boasting just now, but as soon as he entered the dungeon, he started cursing. It turned out that this strange dungeon was a world of ice and snow. The temperature was extremely low. Even Lai Zenya, in his role as a meat shield, was having a bit of trouble enduring it. But facing Yu Ran's mockery, Lai Zenya still gritted his teeth and persevered. But what he didn't know was that Yu Ran had the legendary Arthur equipment, a high-temperature necklace that could help Yu Ran stay warm in freezing weather. Wearing the death mask, Yu Ran directly pulled Lai Zenya away from the main force. Because regarding this dungeon, Yu Ran already had a plan. The necromancer Yu Ran, combined with the immortal Lai Zenya, was definitely an invincible existence. After entering the Wily Fox dungeon, Yu Ran led Lai Zenya deep into the forest. Yes, this time he still wanted to level up on his own. Deep in the forest, Yu Ran casually summoned skeleton soldiers. Looking at the skeleton soldiers wearing red leather armor, Lai Zenya was also stunned. It turned out that before entering the dungeon, Yu Ran had used the true serpent skin to make them a set of equipment. Thinking about how difficult the true serpent was to deal with, Lai Zenya wished he could turn himself into Yu Ran's skeleton soldier. This valuable equipment made everyone envious. In the corner of the first floor of the dungeon, Yu Ran and Lai Zenya were like splitting bamboo, harvesting stray cats, with the true serpent skin. This equipment was truly like a tiger with wings. Normal tundra wolves were easily controlled by Yu Ran and the 2 of them, but the players on the other side of the forest were not so lucky. Before their base camp was even built, they were attacked by a large number of tundra wolves. The defensive line set up by the players instantly collapsed, and for a time, the pitiful screams were unbearable to hear. Even when the captain appeared to stabilize the formation, it was useless. because at this time the Wolf King had appeared, and along with the wolf howl, the ground began to shake. Tens of thousands of wolf soldiers followed the command and charged down from the mountain. The dense pack of wolves made everyone terrified. But all of this was within Yuran's sight. Looking at the pack of wolves besieging everyone, Yuran casually threw down a wolf corpse next to him and directly activated violent art. The loud explosion attracted the attention of the pack of wolves and also surprised everyone. But before the players could understand the situation, Lai Zenya, leading a dozen skeleton soldiers in an instant, rushed out and opened up a gap in the pack of wolves. And at this moment, Yuran stood on a high cliff, activated the Sun Knight equipment set, and used the death mask to connect all the skeletons, and then activated the aura skill he had just learned. 3 layers of skills overlapped at the same time. The attributes of the skeleton soldiers under his command instantly soared, their whole bodies emitting golden light. Like having been injected with chicken blood, they charged towards the pack of wolves. And at this time, the pack of wolves had no idea they were about to face a cataclysmic disaster. Why were the skeleton warriors all looking up to the sky and roaring? Even Lai Zenya, Yuran's longtime partner, was full of doubt. It turned out that right before the battle, Yuran had taken out a very ordinary skill, aura. This auxiliary skill had a normal effect in the hands of other players, but in Yuran's hands, it could be comparable to a divine skill. When the death mask was paired with the knight's set, and then the aura was activated, the skeleton warriors under his command were like being injected with chicken blood, madly reaping the pack of wolves. In an instant, the golden light shone brilliantly, and the pack of wolves was instantly defeated. The ferocious wolves of the past, in Yuran's eyes, were no different than clay chickens and pottery dogs, and with the cooperation of violent art, the pack of wolves was quickly dealt with. At this time, the player captain of the Miser Guild came to thank Yuran, but Yuran didn't budge. His goal in doing so wasn't to rescue this group of people, but to let them see his strength, so that in the next boss fight, they would understand their place. As for why Yuran didn't eliminate them, the reason was simple: because his current hidden identity couldn't be exposed. He had to associate with the Nizal Guild in order to take the next step. Moreover, this rabble couldn't cause any harm to Yuran either. At nightfall, when the other players were resting, Yuran took Lai Zenya to hunt tundra wolves because he had to level up quickly. After a night of fighting, Yuran had increased to level 35. His blood poison technique had now undergone a qualitative change, evolving into black blood, and its power had greatly increased. Yuran was also very satisfied with the results of this time, so the two of them started to rest. Lai Zenya was also worthy of being a glutton, directly setting up the meat and grilling it over the fire. Before he could even eat 2 bites, Yuran suddenly asked a question that terrified him to the core. Yuran asked him if he activated his immortal body and was pierced by the wily fox, would he still be able to hold on? Hearing this, Lai Zenya's back turned ice cold, and in an instant, the grilled meat in his hand didn't seem so fragrant anymore. It was already very unfair to make him a meat shield, and yet he was so ruthless, making him do such a cruel and inhumane thing. But what could he do? He couldn't beat Yuran. It seems that in this fight for the wily fox, Lai Zenya would suffer a lot. The biggest characteristic of the wily fox is its extreme speed. Normal players can only see its shadow and are completely unable to hunt it. Just as the people of the Mixel Guild were at their wits' end, Lai Zenya's staggering figure appeared in front of everyone. Yes, he wanted to use the method Yuran proposed yesterday, to use his body to restrain the wily fox. But after all, it was the final boss. Although the damage wasn't large, its speed was extremely fast. After a few rounds, Lai Zenya was only taking hits, completely unable to attack, plus the ground was all ice. His center of gravity was completely unstable. At this moment, Lai Zenya slipped. Xiao Hu also saw this scene, seeming to have seized an opportunity, directly charging towards Lai Zenya, the horn on its head immediately piercing Lai Zenya. The intense pain almost made him pass out. At this time, Zenya was also very tough, directly activating his immortality skill, his 2 hands grabbing the fox's fur, gritting his teeth and persevering. The people of the Mysire Guild in the distance were directly dumbfounded. This tactic of using his body to take the hit was no different than seeking death. The great image from just now turned into a fool. While everyone was thinking, a cold arrow flew out, aiming straight at the fox's left eye. That's right, Yu Ran had made his move, smearing his newly upgraded black blood sword, directly shooting through Xiao Hu's eye. The next second, the skeleton warriors went all out, charging forward in a chaotic melee with their knives and swords. In this attack, if Xiao Hu could still survive, that would be a miracle. Very quickly, Xiao Hu was killed by Yu Ran, and the horn on its head also smoothly landed in Yu Ran's hands. On the way back, Yu Ran called Wu Chan, telling him to post a message, saying that if the Nightsire Guild particularly wanted this horn, he would give it to them. Hearing this, Wu Chan was not surprised, and happily agreed. Indeed, intelligent people have very simple conversations. Looking at this, are you also full of doubts? Clearly Yu Ran had a feud with the Nightsire Guild. Why would he want to give them equipment? In fact, Yu Ran had already thought about it. If he kept Xiao Hu's horn, the Nightsire Guild would definitely find ways to secretly snatch it. If Yu Ran announced in advance that he would give it to them, with their arrogant faces, they would definitely refuse and even repay Yu Ran for rescuing their guild members' weapons in the dungeon. The reputation of a hypocritical gentleman is not easily acquired. Yu Ran's move was indeed brilliant. If it were me, I would definitely doubt it like Li Zenya. As for Long Wan, because Yu Ran had previously, in the two-headed hound dungeon, killed a member of the skeleton guild, Li Rongwan took action, directly rewarding Yu Ran with a level 40 Dark Apostle, a special surprise. It seems that Yu Ran at level 35 needs to level up quickly. People with high IQ often betray others, and even make others help them count the money. Yu Ran was this type of person. After resolving the Xiao Tu dungeon, Yu Ran's series of miraculous operations not only gained him fame, kept Xiao Hu's horn, but also received a gift from the Mai Sayer Guild, the legendary skill summon Night Demon statue. Perhaps Mai Sayer never dreamed they would give a weapon to their enemy. Yu Ran now had 2 level 40 legendary memories in his hand. Leveling up quickly was inevitable. Of course, Wu Chan had also prepared everything for him. After several collaborations, Wu Chan had also understood what kind of person Yu Ran was. The enemy of an enemy is definitely his friend. So Wu Chan had prepared for Yu Ran level B survival terrain stronghold, absolutely the best place to level up. But after hearing the news, Li Zenya was completely troubled, because for this dungeon, Wu Chan prepared for him to go with Yu Ran. It seemed that he had become Yu Ran's personal Luful. In another development, at the Nightsayer Guild, Song Xinghui had learned that Yang Chixu was killed, but he did not care about his life or death at all. He only wanted to know who took the high-grade necklace of the knight's equipment set, who took it. Moreover, now a conflict had broken out with the Skeleton Guild. The source of all of this was Li Rongwan of the Firebird Guild. It seemed that Li Rongwan's decision to join the guild had paid off. Song Xinghui had shifted his attention from Yu Ran to Li Rongwan, and even sent out Ling Mu, the guild's hunting dog, to assassinate him. But what he did not expect was, at this moment Yu Ran had completed his plan in the dungeon, reached level 40, and had listed Ling Mu as his next target. A necromancer, not going to fight monsters, but going to work as a warehouse porter. Yes, it was to let others borrow his item bag, so that customers could bring back more equipment from the dungeon. But Yu Ran wasn't simply going to work at the warehouse, but for revenge. To approach Ling Mu sooner, Yu Ran had disguised himself as a new player, registered to join the warehouse team, and went to the market to infiltrate the Mai Sai Guild's team. Speaking of the market, this place was not simple at all. There were many dungeons here. Cities and countries, to quickly resolve these dangers, had specifically opened a special area here. Moreover, anyone could use the identity of an ordinary player to resolve them, even if they were a heinous criminal. Therefore, this place had also become a haven for criminals. Murders and enticements also frequently occurred. At this moment, Ling Mu was leading a team to prepare to resolve a dungeon, and he had also received orders from his superiors, after completing his current mission, to go assassinate Yu Ran and Ling Luan. He just didn't know that Yu Ran was already by his side. On the other side, Wu Chen was also worried about Yu Ran, because Ling Mu was a person with terrifying strength. Among the players below level 50, he was already an invincible existence. His Aiken abilities were completely incomparable to the previous Yang Chixu. Moreover, he was also one of the Knights of the Round Table, with a legendary Arthur in his hand, Lancelot's ring. But Yu Ran never fought battles he wasn't sure of winning. About this Ling Mu, he remembered him even more clearly. This person in his previous life was also a colleague. Both were hunting dogs of the guild, specializing in assassinating players, sweeping away the guild's obstacles. It's just that the ending for both of them is the same. It's just a pity that in this life, his life will be ended by Yu Ran. Not long after entering the dungeon, Yu Ran had already quickly dealt with one member. When Suzuki discovered the corpse, he immediately analyzed that the perpetrator was a veteran. But as a hunting dog for the guild, this person was also extremely ruthless. He directly ordered, rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let one go, slaughtering all the players in the warehouse on the spot. Just as they finished massacring the players in the warehouse, a loud sound of footsteps came from the distance. Everyone heard the sound and looked over. A huge stone statue was staring at them. Suzuki was indeed worthy of being the guild's #1 hunter. After seeing the stone statue, he immediately saw through Yu Ran's plan. Under his command, the people of the Nizar Guild coordinated extremely well. They quickly discovered the weak point of the stone statue, and together attacked the stone statue's legs. Before long, this huge monster was defeated. But at this moment, a cold arrow suddenly appeared in the thick fog, aiming straight at the healer in the team. The next second, Suzuki made a move, raising his sword and slashing down. The cold arrow was cut in two. But before Suzuki had a chance to continue analyzing, strange noises appeared again from the distance. Before they could see what was rushing over, the archer in the team immediately launched multiple attacks. The dense barrage of shots could not hit them. But on the contrary, they were getting closer and closer. When they got close to everyone, they discovered that they were Yu Ran's skeleton soldiers. But when everyone engaged, they were shocked to feel the power of this type of skeleton soldier. Although everyone was hit, it wasn't enough to make them lose their composure. In just a few rounds, some of the skeleton soldiers fell, and Suzuki was even more abnormal, not only quickly grasping the weak points of the skeleton soldiers, but also from their movements, deducing Yu Ran's strength. He knew clearly that Yu Ran was a veteran, so he had to fight quickly and win quickly. He immediately commanded everyone to go all out, attacking the joints of the skeleton soldiers. Very quickly, the skeleton soldiers were defeated one after another. At this moment, Suzuki glanced and discovered Yu Ran's location. To capture the bandits, capture their leader first. Suzuki turned around and directly rushed to kill Yu Ran. Suzuki's sword light flashed past Yu Ran's cloak, but the next scene shocked Suzuki. What met his eyes was Yu Ran's other identity. Just as everyone was still in doubt, Yu Ran quickly retreated, because in the deep forest, Yu Ran had long since set a trap for everyone. Don't think Suzuki looks cunning. His strength is not ordinary. Even Yu Ran almost lost his life at his hands. Just now, when Yu Ran quickly retreated into the forest, a subordinate of Suzuki couldn't maintain his calm. He disregarded Suzuki's obstruction and directly chased after Yu Ran. But the next second, a loud explosion rang out. It was indeed Yu Ran's self-destruct move. Suzuki saw this and immediately became alert. At this moment, the player from earlier stepped out of the fog. The explosion almost took his life. But before he could take 2 steps, he coughed up black blood. The teammates next to him saw this and hurried to help, but Suzuki waved his hand to signal the healer to stop, because he had seen clearly that this person had been poisoned too deeply. It couldn't be cured. Blindly trying to cure him would only cause the healer in the team to also be infected with the poison. But faced with the fear of death, this player went crazy and charged forward. Who would have thought that what awaited him was Suzuki's sword? Just as Suzuki was wondering why Yu Ran hadn't used poison earlier, the surroundings suddenly stirred. His teammates also began to show abnormalities. Sure enough, Yu Ran still chose to attack from easy to difficult, using blood mist to plant black blood poison on everyone's wounds. When everyone found out, it was too late. Only Suzuki was left standing on the field. Before he could get angry, a giant skeleton warrior appeared behind him. But on Suzuki's hand was Lancelot's ring, which could resist all negative effects. Yu Ran's poison had absolutely no effect on him. He easily dodged the skeleton soldier's attack. It seems that this life and death battle must determine the winner and loser. At this moment, the auspicious light of both sides simultaneously focused on this battle. Without saying a word, Yu Ran directly activated the night armor set, turning on the sun's protection. This battle could be said to be extremely dramatic. Both sides exerted all their strength. Until the very end, Yu Ran had kneeled on the ground, and all the skeletons on the field had also been destroyed by Suzuki. Although Suzuki was also almost out of blood at this time. But when experts fight, victory or defeat is only a hair's breadth away. Yu Ran, kneeling on the ground, also felt confused. This time he had truly misjudged, underestimating Suzuki's strength. But Suzuki wouldn't give Yu Ran a chance to regret it, dragging his tired body to Yu Ran, raising his longsword, ready to strike. At this moment, Yu Ran suddenly jumped towards Suzuki, his palm directly hitting his chest. Only a flash of blood was seen, a skill that Yu Ran had never used before. Blood drain technique was displayed by him. The little blood left in Suzuki's body immediately transferred to Yu Ran. Yu Ran's stamina also immediately recovered by 5%, stopping the bleeding state. That's right, it was the skill that Li Wenwen had given Yu Ran that year, which became his last regret. Walking to Suzuki's side, Yu Ran snatched Suzuki's ring with one hand. The old horse of the Nizer Guild before him was finally taken down by Yu Ran. It's truly pitiful for Suzuki. Even in death he didn't know why Yu Ran killed him, because he believed that the ambitions of the Nizer Guild were not wrong, that this world should be controlled by players, because this is the law of nature. Hearing this, Yu Ran sneered, holding the ring in his hand, and said coldly to him, "The law of nature, then today I'll kill you, Eliki, and ask if you accept it or not." After completing the spectacular reversal, Yu Ran also got what he wanted, the legendary equipment, Lancelot's ring. Up to this point, 2 of the Round Table Knights of the Misher Guild had been killed by Yu Ran. And just as Yu Ran stepped out of the dungeon, a man in military uniform came to block his path. Without saying a word, the man directly tossed a walkie-talkie to Yu Ran. After connecting, he learned that this man was sent by Wu Kan. Through these few actions, Wu Kan had completely understood Yu Ran's intentions. It seemed that the two people's goals were consistent, which was to destroy the Misher Guild. Moreover, Wu Kan, this cautious broker, finally expressed his wish to meet Yu Ran. He even prepared a surprise for him. At this point, the two officially formed an alliance and started a long-term partnership. In the Firefox dungeon, Yu Ran still used the identity of a foreigner, fighting monsters with Li Zhenya. To deal with the boss, Yu Ran didn't hesitate to lend Lancelot's ring to Li Zhenya, because, this time, they still planned to use the same method they used to deal with Hu Jiao before, to have Li Zhenya hold back the Firefox. Li Zhenya, who had learned his lesson from the previous time, how could he easily agree? But for Yu Ran, this was not difficult for him, because in this world, there was nothing that a barbecue couldn't solve. Yu Ran promised Li Zhenya that if he could hold back the Firefox for 5 seconds, he would buy him as much food as he wanted. Under the temptation of food, Li Zhenya finally agreed. But when he actually faced the Firefox, he realized that things were not that simple. When he used his strength to strangle the Firefox suddenly unleashed a curse skill toward Li Zhenya. Fortunately, Yu Ran had thrown the ring to Li Zhenya beforehand. Otherwise, after this dungeon, Li Zhenya would have certainly gone blind. But even so, the Firefox's curse was still very powerful. The intense pain almost made Li Zhenya give up. But for the sake of his stomach, he still gritted his teeth and persevered. Just as the two of them had just finished dealing with the Firefox, Yu Ran's alias once again made the front page of the newspaper, which made Li Longwen become interested in this person. At this moment, Li Longwen's secretary suddenly delivered news that the Misher Guild had already started recruiting the Death Knight. Hearing this, Li Longwen was also extremely troubled. But Yu Ran at this moment suddenly proposed to have Li Longwen recruit himself, the person he was pretending to be, even going as far as saying that he was looking for a Skull Knight skill. It seems that this time Yu Ran planned to use his double identity to play a trick on Li Longwen. The Misher Guild's hunting dogs that Yu Ran killed would naturally have new hunting dogs to replace them. And this time, the Misher Guild set its sights on the Death Knight, John Cho. This person had the same profession as Yu Ran. The skeleton soldiers that he summoned at will almost formed an army. If it wasn't for Yu Ran's appearance in this life, stealing away most of his dark apostle powers, perhaps this person would have grown faster. And on another side, Li Longwen, to restrain the Misher Guild, prepared to cooperate with the Front Guild, ranked in the top 5. It's just that Li Longwen didn't know this guild had already reached an agreement with the Misher Guild. This cooperation was only to weaken Li Longwen's power. In order to infiltrate the H-country market, the Frent Guild reached an agreement with Li Longwen to jointly enter a dungeon under the name of the Firebird Guild. As for the people from the Firebird Guild, they only needed to sit and gain experience without needing to act. It seemed like a good thing, helping them level up for free, but in reality it contained a shocking secret. On the surface, they were giving benefits, but inside they were constantly humiliating everyone to paralyze Li Longwen and wait for an opportunity to act. But Li Longwen didn't know any of this. After clearing a few dungeons, Li Longwen saw that the Frent Guild hadn't taken any action, so he prepared to enter the 6th-floor dungeon. And the Frent Guild at this time was also slowly revealing its fangs and claws. According to information Yu Ran received from Wu Ken, there were always people from Misher in the Frent Guild, and this time in the dungeon, person named Sam Oliver on his body was wearing the round table knight equipment that Misher had lent him, Parsifal's spear. The purpose of this trip was to eliminate Yu Ran. But how could he have known that while he was targeting Yu Ran was also targeting him? Looking at the documents in his hand, Yu Ran smiled maliciously. A bold idea appeared in his mind. Sam Oliver, who was wearing the knight's equipment, was also eager, wanting to prepare to eliminate Yu Ran as soon as he entered the dungeon. How could these petty thoughts escape Yu Ran's eyes? Since they wanted to plot against him, then they should wash their necks and wait for the Grim Reaper to harvest. Turning around, Yu Ran ran deep into the forest alone. Seeing Yu Ran, who always followed the rules, leaving, the whole team was confused. But before everyone could recover, Sam's group had already rushed toward everyone with weapons. After dealing with Li Longwen's subordinates, Sam led his people to find Yu Ran's tracks. But all of this was seen by Yu Ran from afar. After everyone left, Yu Ran took out from his bag the equipment he obtained after hunting the fire fox, Bruce Autra's ring. The properties of this ring could be said to be heaven-defying, as it could enhance all the player's skills. Following a series of level-up system notifications, Yu Ran's skeleton soldier skill had also far surpassed, evolving into ice skeletons. At this moment, a pack of wolves suddenly appeared next to Yu Ran. It seemed that Yu Ran's Immortal Legion would soon have more troops. Looking in the direction of Sam, while everyone was searching, but before everyone could react, Yu Ran activated the corpse explosion technique. Before the smoke could clear, the skeleton soldier's greatsword had already slashed down. Immediately after, Yu Ran's cold arrows pierced through. This kind of airtight attack? How could these demonic dragons possibly withstand it? After only 3 moves, only Sam remained on the field. But Sam wasn't doing well either. The spear in his hand had already been cut in 2. Seeing the favorable situation he had created turn into annihilation, he directly took out a knight's equipment, or rather, Shiva's spear. This equipment was indeed a pearl tier item, and with a single blow, it pierced through the skeleton soldier's body. But Yu Ran didn't intend to use the skeleton soldier to deal with him. He commanded the skeleton, and the skeleton soldier immediately began to retreat. Just as Sam was confused, a wild wolf skeleton slowly walked out. After wearing the legendary ring, Yu Ran's skeleton soldiers had been comprehensively upgraded. He could not only summon human skeleton soldiers, but even ordinary monsters could be directly summoned into his undead legion. Although they were all skeletons, the attributes of the 2 types were worlds apart. Human skeleton soldiers could freely use weapons, and their combat power was obviously higher than those with just limbs, and the monster skeletons were stronger. But the monster skeletons with limbs had a faster running speed than the skeleton soldiers. And facing an agile player like Sam, Yu Ran would naturally send out a monster skeleton. Although Sam had a divine artifact in his hand, his speed and agility were completely incomparable to the monster skeleton. Seeing the skeleton rushing towards him, Sam directly activated the Silent Hunter skill. But as soon as the spear stabbed out, the wild wolf dodged it. This scene shocked Sam. In his impression, skeleton soldiers were very slow and could not possibly dodge his guaranteed kill strike. But before he could think more, the wild wolf pounced again, directly biting his left hand and dragging him across the ground. The spear in his hand also flew far away, At this time, Sam still didn't seem to recognize the situation. In his mind, he was only thinking about his divine artifact. Even if he lost his left hand, he had to get back the divine artifact. Only then could he survive. At this moment, Yu-Ran slowly walked up to him. When the divine artifact was taken by Yu-Ran, all of Sam's illusions shattered. He desperately begged Yu-Ran for forgiveness, but Yu-Ran? How could he let go of someone who opposed him? For this operation, he had contacted Wukan beforehand to make a custom-made mask of Sam. It was so that after killing him, he could deceive the people outside the dungeon. Indeed, Yu-Ran's method had deceived many people. After going outside, Yu-Ran wore Sam's mask and directly massacred everyone before fleeing. And the person in charge of contacting Sam, after watching the surveillance camera, was also extremely shocked, thinking that Sam had betrayed them. These secrets absolutely could not be known by others, and moreover, right now, they especially couldn't let the Missail Guild behind him know. Otherwise his ending would be very miserable. He had to keep this matter secret and capture Sam first. But they didn't know that. This was originally Yu-Ran's plan. At this moment Yu-Ran was sitting in the car Wukan had prepared for him. To conceal the truth, he needed to hide in a dungeon for a while. And at this moment, Yu-Ran suddenly proposed a dungeon to Wukan, the mad scholar. Hearing this, Wukan was also shocked. Because this dungeon, although it was only a 2-floor dungeon, no one had cleared it to this day. Even in Yu-Ran's memories from his previous life, this dungeon had been challenged 43 times, without any success. Moreover, this dungeon had a level limit, and those above level 60 could not enter. In his previous life, Yu-Ran had never experienced it either. But Wukan had great faith in Yu-Ran. Even if he said there was a 10% chance, Wukan would consider it an opportunity for failure. And Liken, who was standing next to him, was so scared he was stunned. It seemed that this time he would have to suffer in the dungeon again. Yu-Ran actually planned to bring Liken along to challenge the dungeon that no one had ever conquered. But Yu-Ran's thoughts were not just placed in this dungeon, but he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to join hands with Wukan to pull off a big scam. Of course, this time Yu-Ran still used the identity of a wee country citizen, openly challenging. Only when posting the news did he specifically instruct that he hoped to receive the support of the Missail Guild. To prove that the dungeon announced by Missail was being criticized by an outsider, could they really not take anything? Moreover, not only take, but also give something good? Only then could they avoid a public outcry. How could a hypocrite be so easy to make? But the loophole in Missail only needed Yu-Ran to poke it once, and it would be much harder to deceive people in the future. Wukan and Yu-Ran were indeed elite schemers. But on the other hand, the difficulty of this dungeon was truly not small. There had been 23 failures before, and this time with Yu-Ran setting the definition, there would definitely be many who wanted to take advantage. Because each time this dungeon required 80 people to enter, it had failed 23 times before. Just the equipment of the players who died was already a significant amount of income. Under this temptation, there would definitely be many players who would risk entering to get a share. But Yu-Ran originally had no intention of cooperating with anyone. As long as they didn't disturb him, it would be fine. During the press conference, Yu-Ran directly generously said to all the players, "Please don't hinder me." This arrogant behavior also caused dissatisfaction among the major guilds. But Yu-Ran didn't care at all, because before absolute strength, face was just a dispensable thing. If anyone didn't know life and death and dared to challenge him, they would definitely become white bones beneath his feet. As night fell, everyone hugged each other to keep warm in the camp. At this moment, a skeleton lying on a tree, its eyes slowly lit up. That's right, this was placed here by Yu-Ran, a skeleton soldier used for eavesdropping. And at this moment, a man in red revealed an earth-shattering secret. It turned out that the purpose of this trip was to find a lost piece of player equipment from a previous guild, Van Gogh's hand. This was a piece of equipment that even Yu-Ran had never heard of. Since it could make so many people risk their lives searching for it, it seemed it was definitely not an ordinary item. Then he must get it first. Yu-Ran and Li Zunya's purpose for entering the dungeon this time was not the final boss, but other players. Because this level a dungeon had been conquered 23 times, but still couldn't be cleared. The equipment of the dead players was piled up like mountains, and anyone who entered wanted to pick some up. Of course, our protagonist, Yu Ran, was no exception. While accidentally learning about the existence of the Van Gogh bracelet in the dungeon, this piece of equipment, Yu Ran also began his treasure hunting journey. But unlike other players' treasure hunting methods, he relied on his exclusive skill, Eye of Anubis, to find the whereabouts of the bracelet. Sure enough, on the corpse of a player from the Great Kunlun Guild, Yu Ran saw the bracelet. But things were not so simple, because the bracelet accidentally fell into the pants of the final boss of this dungeon. It seems that the two of them have to speed up the pace. Then Yu Ran conveniently summoned a giant jaw, whose domineering appearance made Lai, the glutton, extremely jealous, insisting on trying to ride it, according to Yu Ran's plan. They were the final bosses for him to practice on beforehand. He even took out a full set of knight's armor, Lancelot's ring and Poxaver's cloak, holding two pieces of divine equipment, with a ferocious beast underfoot. It seemed that Li, the glutton, was no longer just a shield this time. On the way the two of them were looking for the final boss, Yu Ran told Lai, the glutton, that the final boss of this dungeon was a man-eating demon, extremely powerful. Because each time the dungeon was conquered unsuccessfully, it would allow the surviving monsters to accumulate experience, becoming more powerful. In other words, this man-eating demon, after 23 upgrades, had the level of a hunter. Moreover, it was very likely that it would use the corpses of players as bait for an ambush, because this final boss also had a very troublesome skill, which was to emit nameless fear, causing players to be unable to move for a short period of time. Although this skill couldn't completely control the player, but in a true life or death battle, success or failure was in an instant. Just as the two were talking, this scene was also happening at another end of the dungeon. Hearing the screams of the players, Yu Ran and Lei Zenya quickly moved over. Sure enough, a small team had been massacred. Seeing the final boss, Lai the glutton also couldn't hold back, directly riding the wolf and rushing forward. The man-eating demon didn't even have time to turn its head before it was suddenly attacked, but it couldn't fundamentally stop Lai, the glutton, from advancing. A golden light flashed, the effect of Lancelot's ring was activated, making Li the glutton no longer afraid. But just as Lai the glutton was getting cocky, the giant-jawed wolf suddenly disobeyed and rushed straight towards the man-eating demon. It turned out that Yu Ran from behind had used the death mask to control the giant-jawed wolf. But close combat like this was not what Li the glutton wanted. But there was no other way. Who told him to be a warrior? The giant-jawed wolf, after being controlled, reacted even more agilely, dodging the man-eating demon's attack with a single dodge, and turning around to jump onto the ice pillar next to it. Lai, the glutton, was not just anyone either. Swinging his spear and stabbing the man-eating demon, Poxaver's spear was indeed a divine artifact. After its effect was triggered, a hole directly appeared in the man-eating demon's body, and even weakened the man-eating demon's recovery ability. But this series of operations seemed simple, but in reality was extremely dangerous. But at this time, Yu Ran's Rib Skeleton army was also ready. The Rib Skeleton army, equipped with blood-seeking weapons made by Yu Ran, was indeed like a tiger with wings. Adding to that the girl holding the Poxaver spear, the man-eating demon was fundamentally not a match. Before long, its body was already filled with spears. But these spears were not ordinary weapons, but were made from Yu Ran's blood. Once hit, one would be poisoned. At this time the man-eating demon was dying, while other players were still searching for equipment. Completely unaware of what had happened here, as the poison spread, the man-eating demon couldn't resist any longer, and this time Yu Ran also received a gold medal. And what Yu Ran was most concerned about was actually still that unknown piece of equipment, Van Gogh's bracelet. On the way back, Yu Ran meticulously examined this equipment. It was indeed a top-quality item that adventurous players sought. Just the fact that the wearer could wear as many rings as they wanted was already heaven-defying, because for ordinary player equipment, there was a maximum of only 5 items, and even wearing more wouldn't have any effect. But Van Gogh's bracelet broke this rule. The only downside was, any equipment worn at the same time as Van Gogh's bracelet couldn't be taken off, and would forever become his equipment. Simply put, after wearing Van Gogh's bracelet, one couldn't continue to change other equipment. It seemed that Yu Ran had to think carefully about what equipment to wear next. Just as Yu Ran was thinking, a call came from Wu Tan's phone. It turned out that Lai Longwan had already left the dungeon. Then Yu Ran had to quickly meet him. As soon as they met, Yu Ran recounted everything in the dungeon, twisting the truth and the false, and putting all the blame on Florent. Seeing that he was being teased, Lai Longwan was also extremely angry, declaring that he must find them to settle the score. This dog-eat-dog situation is very interesting to watch, and at this moment, Lai Longwan's secretary brought out a box. It turned out that Lai Longwan had used his connections and spent a large sum of money to buy the Bone Knight skill from Wu Can. He even planned to have Yu Ran give it to Isaac to bribe him, but he didn't know that the person who was really playing him was right in front of him. Yu Ran and Wu Can, these two were real experts. Not only did they swindle a sum from Misael, but even Lai Longwan was being spun around like a top. Taking advantage of Isaac's identity, they successfully obtained the Bone Knight skill from Lai Longwan. Lai Longwan, blinded by his desire to thank Yu Ran, decided to take him to a level C city to show off his abilities. In order to raise his status, he even prepared 3 support members for him, but these 3 were not easy to deal with. They thought that Yu Ran was relying on his identity as Lai Longwan's guard to come here and freeload, and heard that it was Yu Ran's first time entering a level 3 dungeon. Team leader Zheng Yanhong didn't have a good attitude towards Yu Ran as soon as he entered the dungeon, telling him to be well behaved, listen obediently, or they couldn't guarantee his safety. Yu Ran didn't care about Zheng Yanhong's troublemaking because he didn't intend to go with them anyway. Yu Ran also didn't care because he didn't intend to go with them anyway. Not long after the two separated, Zheng Yanhong's subordinate suddenly came to report that there was a lot of activity on Yu Ran's side. Since they were all members of the same guild, Zheng Yanhong was still worried and went to check. But the next scene directly shocked him. Yu Ran had actually set up a series of large traps on his own. But what surprised Zheng Yanhong was Yu Ran's dexterity. As for the effectiveness of the trap, he still had doubts. At this moment, Yu Ran returned from afar, and was even leading a large number of beastmen behind him. He directly passed by Zheng Yanhong and ran towards the middle of the trap. Seeing a large number of monsters entering Yu Ran's encirclement, Zheng Yanhong couldn't remain calm, afraid that Yu Ran would be surrounded and attacked, and prepared to offer assistance. But at this moment, Yu Ran easily jumped onto a wooden stake, his eyes glowing red, and directly activated the blood mist skill. Thick black smoke mixed with the miserable cries of the monsters, directly shocking those on the treetops. The beastmen fell one after another, clearly showing that they had died from Yu Ran's blood poison. After consuming a large amount of blood, Yu Ran placed his hand on the corpse and activated the blood drain skill to replenish his stamina. This way of fighting can be said to be unprecedented, overturning everyone's view of him. As night fell, Zheng Yanhong also came before Yu Ran, apologizing for her previous coldness, hoping that the two sides could cooperate and break through this dungeon together. Faced with the beauty's invitation, Yu Ran instead wanted to sell blood to Zheng Yanhong. And just like that, amidst the argument between the two, the second day arrived. It is often said that men and women working together makes the work less tiring, and this saying is not wrong. Yu Ran's blood combined with Zheng Yanhong's swordsmanship, and quickly they reached the second floor. This second floor was a survival mission, but after scouting, they hardly saw any monsters, only discovering several huge rewards, which also showed that the monsters of this floor were few in number, but were definitely all boss level, very difficult to deal with, and they had to survive here for 6 days. They just didn't know what kind of existence was waiting for them. As soon as they entered the second floor, everyone was hampered by the survival mission. Not only was the area small, but it was also on a cliff, and even the monsters were boss level. While everyone was discussing countermeasures, trouble came knocking at their door. Following a loud stomping sound, a giant white cave troll appeared before everyone. This was clearly a mutated creature, and its combat power was definitely not ordinary. Seeing the monster rushing over, Zheng Yanhong directly activated the Silent Hunter skill, multi-shot. Her sword with blood poison technique quickly shot towards the albino cave troll and pierced its chest. Just as Zheng Yanhong was feeling pleased with herself, the sword in the chest of the albino cave troll suddenly split and bounced out. It turned out that this albino cave troll had an extremely strong self-healing ability. The blood poison technique hadn't even had time to seep into its blood before it was bounced out. Having been stabbed, the cave troll directly gave chase. And Yu Ran, standing on a treetop, seemed to be moving his lips, wanting to help Jing Yanhong and also show his strength to Li Rongguan. After everyone fled, Yu Ran found Jing Yanhong and directly pulled her into a small forest to talk privately. He proposed a battle plan to Jing Yanhong and to use his blood-finding weapon to create a bunch of arrows for her. But Jing Yanhong seemed a bit suspicious of Yu Ran's idea. But after hesitating for a while, she still agreed with Yu Ran. By night, Yu Ran had the warriors in the team advance to attract the white cave troll. And the mages in the team stood in the distance waiting for the troll to appear and cast fire spells. Seeing this scene, Jing Yanhong was also full of doubt, because the white cave troll was fundamentally unafraid of fire magic. But Yu Ran still patiently told her fire magic was only a tool to obstruct its vision. And at this moment, the warriors once again rushed towards the albino cave troll. As soon as the cave troll was injured, Yu Ran immediately told Jing Yanhong to shoot an arrow into the wound. It turned out that before the white cave troll's wound could heal, he would shoot an arrow carrying blood poison into it. Moreover, the white cave troll had a very low IQ, and this type of attack, if used repeatedly, could be destroyed very quickly. Following a loud explosion, the white cave troll finally couldn't hold on any longer and fell. At this moment, Jing Yanhong was completely conquered by Yu Ran, but Yu Ran only wanted to charge her for the blood poison. Indeed, there is no woman in his heart. Drawing his sword and becoming a god, there was a reason for Wu's success. After cooperating with Zheng Yanhong to eliminate the giant in the Beiwa cave, Yu Ran's name also appeared on the front pages of major newspapers. On the other side, the Front Guild wasn't having such an easy time. Not only did their assassination of Yu Ran fail, but they also lost Pahiwa Li's spear. And they couldn't even explain things to Muzzer. Frent, who had messed everything up, was forced to bow his head before Lolongwan. Although his subordinates were all dead, in Lolongwan's place, nothing was impossible to trade. As a price, Frent would provide Lolongwan his own country's dungeon. Among them was a dungeon called the Soul Sovereign. Lolongwan considered this spot a gift and gave it to Ezak. This was in line with Yu Ran's intentions, because this dungeon belonged to a semi-national entity. According to convention, the government doesn't allow players from other countries to participate, but because this dungeon was too dangerous, the government didn't want their own country's guilds to suffer losses, so they could only publicly open the dungeon during the Greatern Guild conference. Everyone was collectively dissatisfied with the Frent Guild's actions, because for this dungeon, they had participated with Frent before, only to ultimately fail. Yet now, the government was letting players from other countries participate, which was clearly a slap in the face. Just as everyone was complaining, the guild leader had a different view. If the government intended to open this dungeon to outsiders, then why not take the opportunity to obtain the government's permission? Although he didn't want the local guild to suffer losses, as long as he offered a reward that no one could refuse, perhaps no one would stop them. Having said that, Kiri slowly raised his right hand. It turned out he intended to use the Ring of the Asian King as a reward, to exchange for a spot in the dungeon for the guild. But as soon as he voiced this idea, he was opposed by the other players in the guild. But Kiri seemed to have absolute faith in this matter. But because he could cause such a strong reaction, it seemed that the attributes of this ring were definitely not ordinary. As for the Soul Undead dungeon, what was it that made Kiri put so much capital into it? It seemed that Yu Ran's dungeon journey this time wouldn't be as easy as before. And yet, Lion Hang had transformed into a foreigner, coming to the US to participate in the Soul Undead dungeon. Through the newspapers, the two also learned that the additional reward for this dungeon was the Ring of the Asian King. If the other party dared to offer this divine artifact, it seemed they certainly had absolute confidence. Moreover, according to the information Lion Hang had obtained, undead existed in the dungeon, and Yu Ran's skeleton soldiers were very likely to be suppressed. But Yu Ran didn't think so, because he already had a trump card in his hand. That was the skill that Wukan had given him before, the power of the Pharaoh. This was a skill that didn't require hunting monsters, and could still be summoned. Any creature that had died could become his immortal army. With it, Yu Ran's forces would continuously increase. As soon as the two entered the dungeon, the people of the Greater Guild directly gathered everyone together. It turned out they intended to rank the guilds based on a contribution system to determine the order of attacking the boss. In other words, whoever killed more monsters would be the first to attack the boss. But the Greater Guild also had missteps in their preparations this time. Not only did they bring the Ring of the Asian King, but even 2 pieces of the Round Table Knight Mulin's equipment, the staff, were brought in at the same time, directly activating the Vanquish effect. Isaac Hedon's magic power exploded in an instant. This was equipment used to attack the 5th floor dungeon. Using it to attack this dungeon seemed a bit excessive, but what was even more unexpected was that Mulin's staff was actually in the Dritran Guild. It seemed that Song Singoe still hadn't obtained this equipment, which was a bit convenient for Yu Ran. Just as the major guilds were hunting monsters, the Greater Guild was going all out. The combination of the 2 divine artifacts gave the team an advantage. Combining a chariot with a mage's group magic, they quickly reached the top position. But Yu Ran still didn't intend to make a move at this time. He secretly followed behind the Greater Guild, taking advantage of the monsters they killed to summon them as his own skeletons, replenishing his forces. By the evening, Isaac Hedon suddenly discovered that his ranking had been caught up by Yu Ran. It turned out that Yu Ran had prepared from the beginning, waiting until the number of his skeleton soldiers had reached the maximum, and then sent Lian Hang to lure the monsters. While Isaac over there had superior equipment and had the advantage in manpower, they were eliminating them in one location at a time, and then moving on to the next location, wasting time along the way. Compared to Yu Ran's monster farming method, he was still a beat slower. It seemed that in this boss dungeon battle, Yu Ran was avoiding it. You have a divine artifact. I have subordinates. When Yu Ran and Isaac Hedon met, they would immediately clash fiercely. Kwang saw the 2 people's unpleasant conversation. The Front Guild was lurking in the dark, seemingly with dark intentions. After Isaac returned, he immediately sped up his monster farming. With the divine artifact in his hand, his magical power was boundless. A sea of flames spread across the mountains and forests, causing countless beastmen to fall. But even so, he still couldn't counterattack and surpass Yu Ran. On the contrary, the distance was getting wider. This was also within expectations. After all, the divine artifact was only used by him alone, while Yu Ran had a group of subordinates. Although Yu Ran's immortal army was powerful, Yu Ran was still not satisfied. But there was no other way. His own magic power value had reached its limit, and he couldn't continue summoning. At this moment, Lian Hang had also lured the monsters over. Yu Ran put on the mask of death and connected with a skeleton riding a horse. Don't underestimate this skeleton soldier. This is something Yu Ran spent a lot of effort to trick from Lai Rongwan, the 5 skulls. The skeleton soldier held the halberd Fahai Vari, like a general giving orders. Countless skeleton soldiers behind him rushed forward in unison. In an instant, countless beastmen died under the halberd Fuhai Vari. In this attack, Yu Ran once again activated Corpse Burst. The loud explosions mixed with the beastmen's screams, and the first floor of the dungeon was quickly breached by everyone. Yu Ran also successfully obtained the position to challenge the first boss. As soon as everyone entered the 2nd floor, the Fluttering Wheel Guild finally revealed their true colors. They directly approached Z, using the excuse of being afraid of losing the Ring of Axi Wang, hoping that both sides would cooperate to ambush Yu Ran. Towards this petty behavior, Z seemed very disdainful. But could he really bear to see his guild's divine artifact fall into the hands of others? Faced with the proposal of the Fluttering Wheel Guild, Z instantly understood the reason. The other party was probably trying to exploit the conflict to gain the upper hand. Having thought through this point, Z directly rejected Fluttering Wheel. But just as the 2 of them were still talking, the system suddenly announced the 2nd floor. It turned out that as soon as they entered the 2nd floor, Yu Ran had already led Lai the Glutton to eliminate the monsters on the 2nd floor. Relying on Lai the Glutton's fearlessness of death, Yu Ran was also desperately using his brain. The reason for rushing into the 3rd floor like this was that Yu Ran didn't want to give anyone a chance to play tricks. It seems that Yu-Ran had long known that players were starting to become restless. As soon as everyone entered the third floor, an ominous sign, demonic creatures appeared in the surrounding atmosphere. While everyone was still in doubt, they suddenly discovered that the demonic creatures were gradually invading their lives. But for Yu-Ran and the gluttonous woman, there was no danger. One had the ability to nullify poison, the other had the ring of Lancelot. Poison was just nothingness to them. But the other players had also prepared antidotes. It was just that the amount they carried was not much, and it could only last for half a day. Seeing that they were at a disadvantage, Fluttering Wheel once again approached Z Hayden. After a while of his persuasion, Z also reluctantly agreed to cooperate. According to the rules, Yu-Ran and the Glutton were already the first to arrive at the front line. They saw a skeleton riding a black horse standing opposite them. Seeing someone provoke it, it directly took off its own head, raising it high. The next second the ground began to shake, and countless skeleton warriors emerged from the ground. The dense shadows made Sichi-Hu shudder. It turned out that Yu-Ran intended to have Lai the Glutton act as the vanguard to delay the time. Because of the existence of the poison, the longer the time dragged on, the more beneficial it would be for them. Just as Lai the Glutton was on a killing spree, the Fluttering Wheel faction also began to act. They led the beastmen towards Yu-Ran, wanting to completely block Yu-Ran's retreat. But Yu-Ran had already been prepared, and he had stored the important locations in the forest. With the corpses and the appearance of the beastmen, Yu-Ran directly activated Corpse Burst. The loud explosion made Fluttering Wheel very confused. But when he followed the sound to look back, he was surprised to discover that the life-threatening explosion was heading towards him. Commending Yu-Ran and Lai the Glutton, the difficulty of this dungeon was truly not simple. Just the black fog on the third floor alone had already made many players unable to withstand it. As time slowly passed, the antidotes of the major guilds were also exhausted. Many players were no longer able to resist. Seeing the people under his command fall one after another, Z was also extremely worried. At this moment, Yu-Ran suddenly appeared at the camp. Seeing this, Z thought that Yu-Ran had failed, and according to the order, the next guild to attack the boss was theirs. But Yu-Ran said to Z that he was just bringing back the injured people of the Fluttering Wheel Guild. Seeing that Fluttering Wheel had just formed an alliance with him, Z's heart also turned half cold. It turned out that the other party had long seen through his plan, but Z was still unwilling to give up and continued to argue with Yu-Ran, because no matter what the reason, as long as one returned to the camp, it would be considered a forfeit. Hearing these words, Yu-Ran sneered. Don't forget that in their team there was also Lai the Glutton, and he was holding down the front line. But at this time, Z didn't care about that at all. Because his team was about to be submerged in the black mist, he even doubted Yu-Ran's ability, thinking that he couldn't hold out for so long in the poisonous fog. But within this team, someone suddenly remembered that Yu-Ran had once hunted true, and it was likely that this black fog had no effect on him. Just as everyone was starting to panic, Yu-Ran spoke up. The reason for the current situation was because everyone didn't check carefully from the beginning, and insisted on putting up a signboard. And the only way to resolve the current situation was to integrate everyone's resources to fight the boss and clear this dungeon. To put it bluntly, he wanted the beautiful scepter and the ring of Axiwang. He was just taking advantage of everyone's panic to impose a moral bind on Z. Under the pressure of public opinion, Z was too helpless and could only give the equipment to Yu-Ran. At this time, Lai the Glutton was at the front line fighting the boss and was gradually starting to feel the pressure because there were truly too many monsters, and it was likely that he alone wouldn't be able to hold out until the end. And at this moment, Yu-Ran slowly walked over from afar. The scepter in his hand was particularly radiant. In Lai the Glutton's astonished gaze, Yu-Ran's stats directly skyrocketed. A series of equipment combo effects issued notifications one after another. And this was just the beginning. The next second, Yu-Ran directly activated all of his summoning skills, and each of the skeleton soldiers stepped forward. Seeing the Undead Legion fully assembled, Yu-Ran activated the towering effect of benevolence, opening the aura skill. The entire Undead Legion on the field directly raised their heads and roared. It seemed that Yu-Ran was truly going all out this time. Yu Ran's plan was not just about killing. Facing the arrogant Great Wen Guild, he knew very well that the public opinion of the players would become the last straw to crush them. In order to survive, Ys was forced to offer 2 artifacts to Yu Ran. With the blessing of the artifacts, Yu Ran's combat power skyrocketed. Very quickly Yu Ran and Lai Ho Chai broke through the barrier of the Undead Legion, appearing in the middle of the battlefield. As for the skeleton soldiers and stone golems summoned by Yu Ran, their mission was to clear out the undead, while the 2 of them focused on attacking the boss. But even if it was 2 against 1, this headless knight Durahan was also very difficult to deal with. Moreover, the head in his hand could emit freezing air, which could freeze the opponent in an instant. If not for Master Lai having Lancelot's ring on his hand, he would probably have suffered a great loss here. But even with the blessing of artifacts, relying solely on that was still not enough to defeat Durahan, because Yu Ran still remembered clearly what his comrades in the previous life had said. Durahan needed a powerful fire attack to be completely destroyed. Thinking of this, Yu Ran immediately pulled out the Brashvari spear and opened the sun shield. With a set of round table knight equipment plus the ring of King Yaxi, his attributes doubled again. Seeing that Yu Ran was now fighting seriously, Lai Haoqi was also extremely excited. Holding his glove, he charged straight up, furiously attacking Durahan's warhorse. Durahan was no pushover either, forcefully swinging his greatsword, striking towards Lai Haoqi. In a critical situation, Lai Haoqi hurriedly dodged, even so, his face was injured. The next second, Lai Haoqi punched out again, trying to block Durahan's punch. But in Durahan's hand, there was still a head that could emit freezing air. As Lai Haoqi's arm began to freeze, Yu Ran also attacked from the other side. He leaped into the air, the spear in his hand aimed directly at Durahan's head. The moment the spear touched, Duran's head emitted freezing air towards Yu Ran. The terrifying freezing air hindered the spear's attack, and the spear shaft began to freeze instantly. Seeing that it was about to spread to Yu Ran's arm, at this moment, a crack suddenly appeared on Durahan's head. Following that, a loud explosion erupted where Yu Ran was standing. Durahan's head, after being struck by Yu Ran, emitted terrifying freezing air, directly blocking the spear's attack. But after all, the Brashvari spear was an artifact, and under the buff of the King Yaxi ring, a faint crack appeared on Durahan's head, along with a loud explosion. A loud explosion erupted under Yu Ran's feet, and the freezing air also dissipated around them. A moment later, a ray of sunlight suddenly appeared. At this time, the system notification said that Durahan had been dealt with. Then, countless undead gradually vanished under the sunlight, and the ground was warm again. Yu Ran stood before the shattered head, extremely surprised. It turned out that inside the head, there was a ring called Heracles. What excited Yu Ran the most was still the properties of this ring, because it was growth-type equipment that could increase attributes based on the player's achievements. This alone made Yu Ran extremely satisfied. After putting away the ring, Yu Ran went to Durahan's corpse and directly activated the summon skill and took it into his collection. It seems there will be one more general in Yu Ran's Undead Legion. The dungeon being cleared was not only beneficial to Yu Ran, Wukan also earned a considerable sum through external betting, but the biggest beneficiary was still Lai Rongwan, who connected with Isaac, making his reputation soar. It seems that everyone wants to have the aura of a hero. Of course, there are always 2 sides to everything. As for the Great Wen Guild, there was no need to mention them. This time the dungeon was a complete loss, and the Misael Guild was also having a terrible headache. Isaac's rapid rise seemed to threaten their position of saving the world, so they did not hesitate to look for the godly sword saint of the Skeleton Guild again. The 2 wanted to quickly break through the 7th floor dungeon to raise the guild's image in the eyes of the people, but the 2 sword saints of the godly palace did not seem interested in saving the world. They just wanted to quickly find an opportunity to get revenge on Yu Ran. After all, they had lost several disciples, and in the end, the 2 sides still did not reach an agreement and left unhappily. At the same event, Lai Longwan also summoned Yu Ran, only that he suddenly made a request to Yu Ran that made Yu Ran extremely embarrassed, which was that he hoped Yu Ran and Isaac would become rivals. Could it be said that Yu Ran's double identity had been discovered by Lai Longwan, or was this originally Yu Ran's plan? Lai Longwan suddenly came to Yu Ran, asking him and Isaac to become rivals. At this point, do you think that Yu Ran's double identity has been revealed? Then you are wrong. Yu Ran is a person who plans 3 steps ahead for every move. How could he make this mistake? The reason why Lilongwan had this request was that after Yu Ran cleared the King of Spirits dungeon, he deliberately sought out Lilongwan and requested it. So that the next plan could be carried out smoothly, Yu Ran deliberately invited Li Haoqi for dinner, to have him wear a mask and pretend to be Isaac. Although Li Haoqi's acting was a bit clumsy, there were no mistakes. The two of them smoothly entered the dungeon. At this time Yu Ran had nothing to worry about. There were no outsiders around. He could finally test his strength and see what realm he had reached. Looking at Yu Ran's current equipment, holding the rose staff, combined with the King Yaxi ring and the high-value necklace, even the summoned skeletal night demons were equipped with the Brashiveri spear. This set of equipment had completely surpassed players of the same level. Even if all skills were activated at the same time, Yu Ran's current magic power and energy value were still a lot, but as soon as the two of them came out, Yu Ran spoke to Lu Wenwan. His own test with Isaac was not deceiving him, but Isaac said that when necessary, he would still look for him. It must be said that these few words from Yu Ran were completely the highest level of baiting. Li Longwan, a cunning person like that, actually didn't see the dragon, but thought that Yu Ran was just a backup for Isaac. Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Yu Ran continued to deliver a powerful dose, telling Li Longwan that Isaac was very likely to leave the guild and establish his own force. Hearing this, Li Longwan's mind began to stir, because he was very eager to pull Isaac to his side. Therefore he said to Yu Ran, if he helped Yu Ran a little more, would he be able to pass Isaac's test smoothly? Seeing this, Yu Ran agreed without hesitation. It was just that what Li Longwan didn't expect was, as soon as he had this idea, he had already jumped into Yu Ran's trap. The rapid rise of Isaac was not only of concern to Li Longwan, but even the person who had reached level 100, the dragon hunter, Francois Cheru, had also taken notice. Right after the dragon hunter had just finished challenging a dungeon, the government also had news, hoping he could recommend a player to challenge a level a dungeon. Although it was said to be a level a dungeon, the boss of this dungeon was a young dragon, and the hunting method was very complicated, and even the 5 major guilds didn't want to try it easily. But the dragon hunter directly named Isaac in the news. It was unknown whether this was an arrangement by Wukin or a surprise for Yu Ran. Of course, Li Wenwen was the most excited, because the more it was like this, the more beneficial this sponsorship deal for Isaac was for him. Therefore he sent Yu Ran a gold skill, and even sent Firestone Demon and Skeleton Mage, 2 skills for Isaac. It seemed that Yu Ran had made a great profit this time. Having learned from the last time when he let Gluttony impersonate Isaac, this time Yu Ran didn't dare to use him easily, but instead he had Wukin prepare a waterproof, scratch-resistant leather item for him. This item could change shape at will, so it was perfect for Yu Ran to use it to cover the skeleton soldier, disguising it as himself to pass. After all, there were no outsiders in the dungeon, only he and Gluttony. After the two of them entered the dungeon, Yu Ran suddenly made a move that moved Gluttony deeply. That is, the first 2 levels were unnecessary. Gluttony could be the meat shield, and Yu Ran himself could handle the rest. As soon as he finished speaking, Yu Ran took out Van Gogh's hand. It seemed that he had decided which accessories he would bring, only to see the ring of the Asian king and the ring of Heracles automatically bind to Yu Ran's body. All kinds of skeletal soldiers, along with the stone golems and other summoned creatures, stood to the side, ready to depart. It seemed that Yu Ran planned to go all out this time and sweep through the dungeon. Yu Ran, with many divine swords in hand, led the Legion of the Undead going all out, initiating slaughter mode. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had reached the 3rd level of the dungeon. As soon as they entered level 3, Yu Ran became cautious again, hiding behind a rock with Gluttony, observing the boss's situation. But at this moment, Gluttony's mind was filled with the explosive scenes of Yu Ran fighting monsters just now. Just as the two were discussing tactics, a loud explosion suddenly came from the sky, and then a large dragon fell down, with a giant beast in its claws. It just threw the beast to the ground casually, and then started eating it. Before it could even eat 2 bites, the dragon suddenly felt something was wrong. because its nest had been shot down to the ground by the fisherman. The corpse of the beastman on it was the result of the two of them. Seeing that the dragon was becoming alert, the fisherman immediately activated the rampage technique. The sudden explosion caught the dragon off guard, and before it could fly up it was hit by a large rock. At this moment, the fisherman and Master Li had already mounted the giant wolf and charged towards the dragon. Their goal was to restrict the dragon on the ground and then kill it. On the other side, just as the dragon broke free from the rock, the Firestone demon pounced. Then, all kinds of skeletal soldiers launched an attack on the dragon together. At this time, Le Gluttony had also climbed onto the dragon's back, but the dragon scales were not so easy to pierce. The dragon roared angrily, and fire spewed from its mouth. Seeing this, Yuran immediately activated the Pharaoh's power once more. Countless skeletal soldiers crawled out, and even Dullahan was summoned by the fisherman, only to see the fisherman use the death mask, directly controlling Dullahan, activating the sun protection effect and rushing towards the dragon. As soon as he approached the dragon's tail, Dullahan directly leaped up, flying off his horse's back, holding a giant sword, and slashing down at the gap between the dragon's scales. A terrible pain struck, the dragon roared, and swung its tail, directly sending Dullahan flying. And at this time, Le Gluttony had also climbed onto the dragon's back, preparing to deliver a fatal blow to its wing. But before Le Gluttony could strike, the dragon wanted to break free and fly into the sky, and Le Gluttony slipped and fell. Just when the fisherman thought this action had failed, Le Gluttony suddenly grabbed on and stepped on the dragon's back to jump up, the Parashiva spear in his hand, stabbed straight into the dragon's wing. This Gluttony at a critical moment messed up again. Luckily, he reacted in time and planted the spear in the dragon's wing. But even so, it still couldn't stop the dragon from taking off. Seeing himself being carried into the sky by the dragon, Le Gluttony knew that just holding onto the spear wouldn't work. He could only risk it, only to see him grip the spear tightly, using the principle of falling from a height, and directly using the spear to tear the dragon's wing. The dragon lost a wing and roared, his body rapidly falling. The gluttonous Lai could only sigh. Clutching the giant dragon's body tightly, Yuran, standing in the distance, saw this scene. The stone in his heart finally settled down, because the distance to kill the giant dragon, they had succeeded. With a loud bang, the giant dragon fell to the ground. Along with the dust on the ground, there was also the giant dragon's chaos. It stretched its enormous body and directly sprayed fire at the largest firestone membrane on its body. Seeing the giant dragon entangled, Yuran immediately launched his skeletal sea soldiers to attack, running towards the giant dragon. But the giant dragon had dragon scales protecting it. The skeletal sea soldiers' attacks were basically a drop in the bucket, and at this moment, Dullahan once again returned to the battlefield, his giant sword still stuck in the giant dragon's tail. In his empty eyes, a glimmering light shone out, as if he was commanding the other skeletal sea soldiers. Then the other soldiers rushed to Dullahan's side, and together they grasped the giant sword impaled into the tail. With a grunt, the giant sword was once again driven into the giant dragon's body and then twisted. The intense pain mixed with Yuran's blood poison spread out. The giant dragon saw its tail entangled by a group of skeletons and turned its head to spew fire at them. But the moment it turned its head, a giant hand was already waiting for it. Before the giant dragon's fire could gather, the Firestone demon firmly pressed down on the giant dragon's mouth. The fire that was burning couldn't be released and directly exploded in the giant dragon's abdominal cavity. But the Firestone demon seemed determined to let it burn to death, completely ignoring the giant dragon's struggle. Its two hands exerted strength once again, holding the giant dragon's mouth shut, letting the fire explode in its stomach. In just a moment, the giant dragon's neck tilted and then fell. Although this attack didn't kill it, it had stunned the giant dragon, and it was at its limit. Moreover, the gluttonous Lai had also used Stex's skill at this time to restore his strength. Yuran and Li joining forces once again to kill the giant dragon was only a matter of time. Just as the two of them finished the killing, Yuran wasn't as excited as the gluttonous Li, but had a solemn expression. At this moment, Yuran suddenly told his companion that after the fire disaster dungeon was cleared, he would definitely die. He just didn't know, between the two identities of Yuran and Isaac, which identity would disappear. Hearing Yu-Ran say he had to die, the gluttonous Lai was directly stunned. Yu-Ran told him that after they left this dungeon, they would start to attack the 4th floor dungeon. And the so-called 4th floor dungeon was currently controlled by high-level players over level 100. The guilds they joined were also top-tier corporations. They not only enjoyed government privileges, they even began to monopolize everything. The rapid rise of the two characters Yu-Ran and Izak would definitely threaten their position. Furthermore, Yu-Ran was also the mortal enemy of the Sword Saint Shingong. No matter what, the identity of Yu-Ran would definitely disappear. As soon as the two of them stepped out of the dungeon, a terrorist from Japan suddenly appeared from the crowd, holding a dagger aimed at Yu-Ran. Seeing this, the gluttonous Li threw a punch backhanded. But the assassin was already prepared. After dodging the gluttonous Li's punch, this assassin didn't give up, directly stabbing the dagger into Yu-Ran's chest. The next second, blood-carrying poison flowed out, and the scene was in chaos, because everyone knew Yu-Ran's blood carried poison, and touching it would be instantly fatal. But the one who fell was not Yu-Ran's real body, but one that he had disguised with a skeletal soldier. Even the blood had been prepared in advance. After placing Yu-Ran down, the assassin launched another attack, aiming towards Izak, but the next second, before Izak could make a move, a flash of sword light appeared in front of Izak, and the assassin instantly fell. His time was up. And the one who made the move this time was the Sword Saint. That's right, during the time Yu-Ran was challenging the young dragon, Sword Saint Shengong had already arranged for an assassin to assassinate Yu-Ran. Then he himself would take on the role of maintaining peace and eliminate him. It must be said, this move both gained him fame and also killed his enemy. It's a pity that despite his meticulous planning, he didn't expect that Yu-Ran had already arranged everything, and the one who died was just his substitute. The only one who was angry was 01. Because the investment he made in Yu-Ran, this deal was considered a huge loss. It seems that the Firebird Guild and the Skull Guild this time would not rest until one of them died. And in this conspiracy, the biggest winner was always Yu-Ran, the man that the major guilds were wary of. He had finally returned. It's just that the Yu-Ran identity in the eyes of others was already a dead man. That's right, this was a key part of Yu-Ran's revenge plan, swapping identities. From now on, in this world, there would only be the identity of Izak. Yu-Ran would no longer exist. In a Japanese restaurant, the Sword Saint was hosting Yu-Ran and the gluttonous Li. Faced with a table full of delicacies, the gluttonous Li was unusually quiet, not touching his chopsticks. Because this time the Sword Saint wanted to win them both over. About the previous assassination attempt on Yu-Ran, he didn't mention a word. Although he knew clearly that Yu-Ran was sitting right next to him, he still had to put on a full show. Faced with the Sword Saint's facade, the gluttonous Li slammed the table and turned to leave, also telling the Sword Saint that he wouldn't cooperate with such an unrighteous person. Before leaving, he even advised Yu-Ran not to trust the Sword Saint, seemingly as if the two had fallen out. But in reality, it was all an act for the Sword Saint to see. Only because Yu-Ran still wanted to continue to trap him once again. Sure enough, after Likanen left, Yu-Ran stated that he would go to the 4th floor dungeon as he requested, but his teammate could only be Likanen. To change Likanen's mind, he hoped the Sword Saint could prepare an equipment for him. Having said that, he left the restaurant. Walking on the main street, looking at the news all over the sky reporting on his death, Yu-Ran smiled wickedly. His plan to fake his death had succeeded. Next, it was time to carry out the next step. Back at the restaurant, the Sword Saint was talking to his disciple. It turned out that he had arranged for this disciple earlier to hide in a dark place to observe everything that had just happened. Luckily, Likanen and Yu-Ran's acting was good enough, and they had successfully deceived them both. This disciple told the Sword Saint that wanting to pull in Izak, the current situation seemed impossible, because Yu-Ran's death made Likanen extremely angry. Although they might be able to pull in Izak, Likanen would definitely not cooperate with them. Not to mention, besides them, there was also a Lai Long outside. Yu-Ran was someone he had painstakingly nurtured. Losing Yu-Ran, he would definitely not let Izak go. Moreover, there was also the Nicel Guild behind him. They believed that they would definitely not sit by and do nothing. In short, no matter how they analyzed it, Pulling Isaac in would be a huge loss for them. After hearing these words, the Sword Saint had an answer in his heart. If he couldn't get it himself, then no one else should even dream of getting it. So the equipment that Isaac needed, let's choose Amaya's jewelry. Moreover, he also promised that if he could pass that 4th floor dungeon, he would also give him Akai's shield. Although it was a bit of a large investment, it would be like grave goods for Isaac and his teammates. But the Sword Saint had calculated everything 1,000, even 10,000 times, and still didn't expect that. Behind Isaac, that is, Yuran, there was a cunning and experienced Wukan. After learning that the Sword Saint was giving away an extra piece of equipment, Akai's shield, Wukan immediately inquired about the whereabouts of this equipment. He told Yuran that this equipment was not actually in their hands, but inside the Mat Wuxi dungeon. This also shows that the Sword Saints group had already targeted this Isaac's identity. He believed that in the next dungeon, they would definitely be more likely to have a close brush with death. The 4th floor level Hellhound dungeon had attracted players from guilds all over the world to participate. Among them there were definitely Yu Ran and Li Shaihu as the top players who frequently appeared in the newspapers. The two of them also walked at the very front of the team. But just as the two entered the dungeon, a loud explosion suddenly rang out at the entrance. Immediately afterwards, the players behind them began to scatter, and when the mist dissipated, the dungeon entrance had been locked. That's right, this time the 4th floor dungeon, only Yu Ran and Li Kan could enter. The other players were all separated outside by the bomb. Just as the major media outlets and experts were successively speculating about the lives of the two men, the Sword Saint sneered. It turned out that this bombing was originally arranged by him. It was intended to eliminate this character, Isaac, but his scheme wasn't as simple as that. Before spreading the news that he was giving away legendary equipment to Isaac, the Sword Saint had already started making arrangements. He lied that Isaac had taken the legendary equipment into the dungeon. But if they didn't clear it, then everyone would be even more afraid of this dungeon. At the same time, he would continue to spread news that whoever challenges this dungeon, he would gift them Akai's shield. Although this was false information, it was also bait in a trap, and those players who wanted to ride over their heads were destined to become the rulers under this legendary equipment. It must be said that this method was indeed malicious, but the Sword Saint's meticulous layout was seen through by Yu Ran immediately. Don't forget, Yu Ran in his previous life was a hunter of the Missile Guild. These kinds of methods for framing players, he had long been proficient in them. Wanting to frame him, that was truly wishful thinking. But how could the Sword Saint know that this arrangement was exactly what Yu Ran wanted? He originally wanted to go hunting by himself. At the same time, in a 5th floor Baijia dungeon, a mysterious player was hunting monsters. With a wave of his hand, several people wearing similar clothes to him appeared and rushed out. It was seen that everyone simultaneously raised their hands and activated the skeleton summoning spell. One by one, skeleton soldiers emerged from the ground, and in an instant, they had filled the entire dungeon. And the man standing at the highest point now took out an equipment, the corpse tree. That's right, this person was the Death Knight, John George. Thanks to the help of the Missile Guild, this person's growth speed was extremely fast, and now he had become Yu Ran's biggest opponent. Who said tankers can only take hits? That was just Li Cannon, warming up before the battle. At this time, in the 3rd floor of the Hellhound dungeon, Li Cannon struggled to crawl out of a large hole in the ground. A small snake-like skeleton crawled out of his clothes. That's right, it was the skeleton that Yu Ran controlled with the death mask. In the dungeon instance, there were no phones. Yu Ran could only use this method to contact the other party. But Li Cannon currently had no time to chat with Yu Ran, because in front of him was a giant. That was the man-eating demon. Li Cannon rushed forward, frantically punching the man-eating demon. He went through a series of flashy moves and dealt 250 damage. The man-eating demon's eyes flashed red, and he directly punched towards Li Cannon. Although Li Cannon could eat well, his body was also very agile. He quickly dodged the punch and jumped backward, but at this moment, a sense of danger surged. The next second, a massive fist slammed straight into Li Hao's chest, making him stagger, and he almost couldn't pull himself off the wall. At this moment Yu Ran said to Lai Hao, "The reason this dungeon has remained uncleared for so long is because everyone on the third floor didn't give it their all. Holding back their strength for the final floor wasn't wrong in itself, but the monsters on the third floor are flesh-eating demons. If you don't use all your means, then you simply cannot survive." But Lai Hao at this moment had nothing but resentment in his head, complaining that Yu Ran wasn't helping him, and Yu Ran already had a way of dealing with these petty thoughts. He said to Li Hao that he completely believed he could handle the flesh-eating demons himself. After all, he was currently wearing legendary gear, the Namin jewelry, which could enhance Lai Hao's physical defense and magical defense effects. Speaking of which, Yu Ran suddenly changed his tone, telling Lai Hao that seeing the current situation, Lai Hao was having a very tough fight, so he had to send a skeletal marine to rescue him. Hearing Yu Ran say he wasn't good enough, Lai Hao hurriedly shook his head and said no, he definitely didn't need to send a skeletal marine to help him. He could do it. Sure enough, as soon as he used the agitation tactic, Lai Hao had fallen into the trap. These thoughts were completely under Yu Ran's control. On the other side of the dungeon, the reason Yu Ran didn't help Lai Shihang, besides believing in his abilities, was that he was searching for some clues. In a cave filled with bones, Yu Ran picked up a skull and began to use the Eye of Anubis skill. The memories of the dead, like cards, entered Yu Ran's mind. Sure enough, just like the information Wu Chen provided, the shield of Ayakizi that the Sword Saint had promised was indeed in this dungeon. But all those who had used it had died, which made him a little curious. This shield was known as the strongest defense system and could completely resist the attacks of hellhounds. Although he didn't know what exactly was on the fourth floor, Yu Ran was still looking forward to getting the shield himself. After leaving the dungeon, how interesting would the Sword Saint's expression be? At the same time, at the Miser Guild, Song Xingho was reviewing recent news and public opinion. Sure enough, after Isaac entered the dungeon, everyone felt that his chances of survival were zero, causing everyone to shift their hopes of saving the Earth to the Miser Guild. Moreover, the news of Yu Ran faking his death had also successfully fooled Song Xinghui. It could be said that the Miser Guild's current situation was extremely good, but Zhang Kaiyan didn't think so, because 3 years ago, he had experienced a similar fate to Isaac, which was being trapped in an underground castle by a bomb. On the contrary, he wasn't killed, but had become even stronger. And now Isaac was very similar to him back then, which made him unable to help but suspect Isaac might be able to survive and come out. If he really could come out of the dungeon this time, then he would personally go and bribe him. Lai Hao not only could eat, but he also knew how to fight very well, causing countless players to fall. The 10 evils Lai Hao alone could handle it, but he also expended a lot of effort. At this time Yu Ran slowly walked to Li Hao's side. Regarding this result, he wasn't surprised at all. If he didn't have a bit of strength, he wouldn't be worthy of being his teammate. But Li Hao now was full of complaints. Every time he was made to be so tired, and he wasn't even given any food. But Yu Ran had no intention of letting him off so easily, directly arranging for a skeletal marine to forcibly carry Lai Hao into the final floor of the dungeon. At the same time, Lai Hao's older brother, Wu Chan, was living very comfortably. At this time, he was flipping through the newspaper in his hand. His methods weren't in the dungeon, but in playing and entertainment. But the secretary sitting opposite him was worried about Hao's safety. After all, in the existing information, hellhounds were extremely dangerous, especially the hellfire they spewed, which was almost impossible to absorb. Unless there was equipment with absolute defense attributes, could one resist it. Moreover, the self-healing ability of hellhounds directly crushed cave monsters. But Wu Chan was helpless about this information. But at this moment, he had absolute faith in Yu Ran. At the 4th floor of the Hellhound dungeon, Yu Ran was carrying a shield, struggling to climb out of a crevice. That's right, this shield was the legendary equipment, the shield of Ayakizi. If he didn't have the Eye of Anubis skill to review the records of the dead players, then it would probably be very difficult to find the shield's location. But Lai Hao didn't care about these things. At this time he was fighting with the Hellhound. Seeing Yu Ran lying on the ground, he thought he was being lazy. After all, each time it was Yu Ran who was carefree and happy, and he was the one suffering and enduring hardship. Just as he loudly complained about Yu Ran, a purple flame suddenly burst out behind him, and the next second, the flame accidentally sprayed toward Hao. Just as Lai Ho closed his eyes, preparing to endure the flame, burning him, a scene that shocked him occurred. The flame didn't hit him at all. Turning his head to look, it turned out to be Yu Ran holding up the shield, resisting the attack of the flame. As expected, it was magical under the heavens' might. With this shield of IAQC, easily winning the first round was no problem. But just as Lai Ho was caressing the shield in his arms, another purple flame lit up from behind him. The two of them were startled at this sight and hurriedly jumped to the side to dodge. Clearly the hellhound was right in front of them, but the hellfire came from behind. This situation made Lai Ho very doubtful, but Yu Ran knew it clearly, because he had already seen through everything with the eye of Anubis. The reason why the previous team of players, holding the shield of IAQZ, were wiped out was because there were two hellhounds in this dungeon. Lai Hao had even killed a dragon, but was now so scared by two puppies that he was sweating buckets. Hanangok Nien and Lai Map stood back to back. Lai Map felt that this time he was about to meet his end. Purple flames erupted, illuminating the entire continent. Although the shield in Lai Map's hand could withstand it, there were two hellhounds. Being sandwiched like this, sooner or later, he wouldn't be able to hold out. Just as he was about to call for Yu Nian's help, he suddenly realized that Yu Nian behind him had abandoned him. It's true, he gave his sincerity to a dog. Yu Nian had long since run to one side. He said to Lai Map that they couldn't be together, so they should break up. Indeed, they were a couple, originally birds of the same forest. When disaster struck, each fled for their own life. Lai Map just realized this harsh truth when a purple light suddenly flashed behind him. Without time to shield his body, flames enveloped his whole body. Even Yu Nian worriedly shouted his name. But relying on the rule of where there's smoke, there's no pain, Lai Map struggled to stand up. Only his shoulder was burnt by the fire. Seeing that the fire was about to reach his lower body, Lai Map desperately rolled around. Yu Nian calmly looked at the other person, planning to use the long-lost technique of stomping to extinguish fire. Afraid of becoming an effeminate man, Lai Map hurriedly took off the burning armor, and thus avoided becoming a woman. Seeing that both were unharmed, the hellhounds roared, and more noises came from the distance, as if they were responding to the hellhounds. Sure enough, the next second, countless black dogs rushed towards the two, instantly surrounding this ill-fated couple. Just as Lai Map was trying to resist, Yu Nian abandoned him once again, swinging the sword in his hand, opening a path of blood. Actually, it wasn't that Yu Nian wanted to survive alone, but this scene reminded him of an image from his previous life. Once in the three-headed hellhound dungeon, he, with his own strength, had massacred more than 20 black dogs like these. Letting Lai Map draw aggro was just to speed up the slaughter. Sure enough, after the two separated, the speed of the hunt increased significantly. Even one of the hellhounds was killed by Yu Nian. This made Lai Map very surprised. Actually, before entering the dungeon, Yu Nian was fully prepared. Although the appearance of the two dogs had disrupted his original plan, it was only going to take a little more time. The thing that countered hellfire, he had already grasped firmly in his hands. That was a long spear made of cactus. Indeed, every move of Yu Nian's was planned out. Although the long spear made of bone could not completely avoid the devastation of the flames, but this time,
Li Rongwan other side also received a gift from Yu Nian.
Had prepared a set of cactus gifts for the hellhounds. Just like the hellhounds, Lai Rongwan on the other side also received a gift from Yu Nian. At this moment in Lai Rongwan's office, his secretary was handing him a secret letter. That's right, this letter was written by Yu Nian for him. Under the behind-the-scenes manipulation of Wu Can and Yu Nian, they were starting to play tricks on Lai Rongwan again. Looking at the two lines at the bottom of the letter, Lai Rongwan revealed a cunning smile. Although he didn't believe Yu Nian now, he would still help him, because from beginning to end, he had always regarded Yu Nian as a pawn. Now that he was still alive, it was just right to make up for the losses he had suffered. But what Lai Rongwan didn't expect was that the one holding the chess pieces in this game was never him. With cactus in hand, the world is in my grasp. After seeing Yu Nian easily kill a hellhound, Lai Map couldn't hold back any longer. He ran towards Yu Nian, saying that he would handle the last hellhound. After all, he also needed face. Yunin looked at the other person in surprise. Clearly he could have coasted to victory. Why choose the path of death? Do you think hellhounds are that easy to deal with? But seeing Lei Map's confident expression, Yunin didn't want to dampen his self-esteem. Only what Yunin didn't expect was that the other party would give him the shield. Was he planning to fight the dog barehanded? It seems that this time Lei Map had bitten off more than he could chew. At the same time, in a tropical rainforest, a group of natives with bare hands were being surrounded by several mercenaries wielding firearms. And in the nearby command center, a special transaction was taking place. In the dark room, Sayajiala, the dejected member of the Sunbird Society, was standing with his arms crossed, looking at the other party. Following a gunshot, the previously surrounded natives were all eliminated, and the other man slowly opened the code box before him. It turned out that this person was using the power of the Sunbird Society to deal with the local people to seize territory. But after Sayajiala took the money in the box, he threw it out forcefully. He said to the other person that money was useless here. What they needed were equipment and skills. Hearing this, the other party also broke out in cold sweat. Due to the special situation, equipment and skills were very difficult to obtain recently, and even on the black market, it was impossible to buy them. The most important thing was that the surrounding dungeons, they didn't have the strength to enter yet. But before he could finish speaking, Sayajiala interrupted him. This is the Thunder Mine area, a paradise for criminals. How dare you, a small fry like you, negotiate with the big bosses? He said, grabbing the other person's collar, intending to teach him a lesson. But before Sayajiala could make a move, a bolt of lightning enveloped the man, instantly turning him into ashes. Sayajiala glanced over, only to see a man covered in blood, holding a skill page in his hand, standing at the door. And this person was none other than Lei D, the leader of the Sunbird Society. Putting down the skill page in his hand, he indifferently said to Sayajiala that there was no need to waste words on small fry. If anyone didn't follow the rules, just kill them all and be done with it. At this moment, in the Hellhound dungeon, both the boss and Lai Tum were lying on the ground like dead dogs on the ground. But the Hellhound was indeed a dead dog, while Latun could still use his immortality skill. After activating the blessing of the river Styx, Lai Tum was suddenly overjoyed. But the fierce battle before had made him a little disoriented, and he almost swung his weapon at Yu Ran. After clearly seeing who it was, Lai Tum sat down on the ground panting, asking Yu Ran if Yu Ran had helped him deal with the Hellhound during the time he was unconscious. Hearing this, Yu Ran smiled faintly, pointed at the Hellhound's corpse, and said, I didn't interfere this time, you handled it all yourself. Hearing this, Lai Tun's heart warmed, not expecting that Yu Ran cared about his self-esteem so much. He really still loves me. This is the darkest male lead I've ever seen. Laying out traps for his grand revenge plan. At this moment, Yu Ran calmly sat in front of Lai Longwan, but Li Longwan was furious inside. After all, Yu Ran was promoted by him, and even he was tricked by the fake death. But the cunning fox he was, had no idea that he was already being controlled by Yu Ran. Yu Ran said. He hid it from him also for his safety. Only in this way could he fool the enemy. Even though he was unhappy inside, Lai Longwan still took out a pile of documents from the drawer, because he still needed Yu Ran's help to work, and this matter is related to the Death Knight that has been rising recently, Janj. Lai Longwan didn't want Azek, whom he invested in, to be suppressed by the other side. But this was exactly what Yu Ran wanted to see. After agreeing with Li Longwan, he said he wanted to discuss things with the Sunbird Guild, because he had the keepsake that Isaac needed in his hands. At the same time, those who were set up by Yu Ran weren't just Li Longwan, but also the Sword Saint of the Skull Guild. The only thing that they didn't expect was, after Yu Ran cleared the Hellhound dungeon, he didn't want the Aegis shield that the other party offered, but wanted another legendary item, the Solomon's Ring. Although the Sword Saint didn't intend to give the shield from the beginning, the existence of this Solomon's Ring was a secret. This made the Sword Saint unable to not suspect that there was an internal spy. At the same time, he also sensed the danger of the character Isaac. So the next thing he had to do was to eliminate Isaac. The only thing the Sword Saint didn't expect was, while he was targeting his prey, The prey had already targeted him. At this moment in the dense forest in Area A, Yuran had arrived at the base of the Sunbird Guild. After seeing a person come back from the dead, Xiajiala of the Sunbird Guild was also a little surprised. Although she didn't understand what the other side's tricks were, what they did was not righteous at all. As long as there was a profit, there were no limits. As soon as Xiajiala asked Yuran what this transaction was about, Yuran evilly told her that he wanted to sell Isaac to the Sunbird Guild. Hearing this, Xiajiala stood up angrily, feeling like the other party was teasing her. After all, Yuran was also Isaac's representative to negotiate. Just as Xiajiala was enraged, a bolt of lightning suddenly appeared behind Yuran, and Thunder Emperor slowly appeared from behind. Seeming very pleased with Yuran's proposal, the two looked at each other and smiled. It seemed that this time the two sides would use Zack as a transaction and jointly plan a huge conspiracy. The collaboration between Yuran and Thunder Emperor was undoubtedly a demonic transaction. The only thing that surprised Thunder Emperor was that the one controlling Isaac was actually Yuran. Of course, he didn't know that the other side was originally just one person. But as a local tyrant in the war zone, Thunder Emperor had never done anything that was disadvantageous. If the other party only wanted to have the character Isaac help him conquer the dungeon, then Thunder Emperor wouldn't cooperate with Yuran. Sure enough, after hearing Yuran's proposal, Thunder Emperor lost interest and even wanted to kill him to silence him. At this time, Yuran said the one-eyed giant dungeon had just appeared in Area A, and he could help him. Hearing this, Thunder Emperor also found it funny because of the other party's arrogance. After all, this was a level 5 dungeon. Although Isaac had just come out of a level 4 dungeon, it didn't mean that their strength could conquer this dungeon. But how could Yuran let this opportunity pass? He said that he would help the other party level this dungeon. Hearing this, Thunder Emperor spoke up. If it was really as Yuran said, and Isaac listened to his orders, then why didn't he directly buy Yuran? So this transaction could only be Yuran, and this dungeon would be considered a test for him. Looking at the skill potion that Thunder Emperor threw on the table, Yuran was silent. But to get revenge, he had to agree to the other party. And so, after finishing his preparations, Yuran sought out Toon. After hearing the other party wanted to enter the level 5 dungeon, Toon was also a little worried. After all, this dungeon was also level up. While the two were discussing countermeasures, suddenly a figure appeared behind the two of them. Yuran focused to look. It turned out to be Michiel of the Ricer Guild. It turned out that he was also one of the members participating in this one-eyed giant dungeon. And because he worshipped this person named Isaac, he wanted to come greet him first. Seeing the appearance of the other party, Yuran was also a little surprised. The memories of his previous life flooded his mind, as if everything had just happened yesterday. And so, early the next morning, the team formed by the Ricer Guild, the Sunbird Guild, and Yuran had assembled. And this time, Yuran would absolutely not let the tragedy of the previous life repeat itself. Absolutely the most ruthless male lead I've ever seen. The leaders of the major guilds were played by him in the palm of his hand. At this time, in the one-eyed giant dungeon, Toon was fighting monsters while asking Yuran how they would explain the collaboration with Thunder Emperor to Lilongwen. In fact, Ligridi's concerns were not unreasonable with Lilongwen's methods. It's believed that he would soon find out that Yuran had joined the Thunder Emperor's faction. But Yuran didn't care and just chuckled. He said that he would personally make it clear with Lilongwen. Hearing this, Ligridi was also very surprised. Wasn't this standard brain-dead behavior? But Yuran explained that, since Lilongwen would find out about this sooner or later, it would be better to just tell him directly. Moreover, with Lilongwen's personality, if he actively told him about trading with the Thunder Emperor, he would definitely think that the one being betrayed was the Thunder Emperor. It has to be said that, it turns out that in understanding Lilongwen, he played it very clearly. And so after 23 days passed, several small teams had arrived at the 4th floor of the dungeon. In the labyrinth of the Minotaur, the Missile Guild, several people were fighting against blood-sucking goblins. Although the team's strength was not weak, the blood-sucking goblins were not easy to deal with either. Luckily, there was a magician, Michiel, in the team, but casting a magic shield required preparation time. What the others had to do now was try to buy time. And at this moment, the blood-sucking goblins seemed to have discovered the missile group's objective. They recklessly charged towards Michiel. And at this moment, Michiel looked up to the sky and roared, a golden light bursting in her eyes. Immediately afterwards, a loud explosion sounded, and the blood-sucking goblins were shocked and fell to the ground. The Missile Guild members had a layer of blue protection on their bodies. Looking at the corpses all over the ground, the bald guy lamented, the dungeon being this difficult was no joke. The others on the team also said that, if next time, they were surrounded in small paths surrounded by walls again, it would be very troublesome. But while they were discussing their battle plan, a blood-sucking goblin behind them slowly got up. Its bloodshot eyes stared intently at everyone. Just as the bald guy turned his head and noticed something was wrong, the goblin jumped towards Michiel. The explosion just now made them realize that, taking out this woman, would make it easier to defeat the others. Seeing the opponent's knife about to fall on her head, Michiel closed her eyes in fear, as if accepting her fate. And at this moment, a scream rang out. Michiel opened her eyes, and the goblin had fallen. And the person who had saved her was Yu Ran. The bald guy was surprised why the other party had appeared here and also expressed his gratitude. If Yu Ran hadn't taken action just now, Michiel would have been in danger. But Yu Ran looked down on them, saying that they didn't even know about the finishing blow. This statement left the bald guy dumbfounded. Yu Ran took his longsword and stabbed it into a corpse on the ground, and sure enough, one of the goblins who saw Yu Ran's action immediately sat up, tears of joy welling up in its eyes. In its heart it thought, please act like a human. Not only it, but also the other goblins that were far away from Yu Ran scurried away. But how could Yu Ran let them escape? In the dark corners, Yu Ran's skeleton soldiers had long been waiting. After the blood-sucking goblins saw the brains before them, they were so frightened they trembled. Their lives were destined to end here. Looking at the bewildered people, Yu Ran sneered. He originally thought fighting with the Missile Guild would be an easy task, but unexpectedly they sent out a bunch of useless individuals. They didn't even know that blood-sucking goblins could play dead. It seems that I had too high of an expectation for you all. Yu Ran's humiliation made the bald guy grind his teeth, but he couldn't refute it. It was just that what he didn't know was, perhaps Yu Ran's humiliation was to protect them. The dark-bellied devil Yu Ran actually had good intentions towards the members of the Missile Guild. Others did good deeds without wanting recognition, but Yu Ran, after saving these people, immediately started ridiculing and mocking them. No matter how good-natured the people of the Missile Guild were, they weren't tortoises that would endure everything. As the leader of the team, the bald guy was the first to lose his patience, wanting to argue with Yu Ran despite his teammates' attempts to stop him. But Yu Ran's mockery wasn't unreasonable. As the leader, before that, he had indeed put his teammates in danger. But even if he was wrong, it shouldn't be to the point of being spoken to so badly. The others on the team also couldn't take it anymore, expressing their gratitude for Yu Ran's rescue, but also hoping that he wouldn't say anymore. But how could they know? Yu Ran's mockery was only to test their attitude first, to see if they had forgotten their previous failures when joining the dark organization of Missile. At this time he told them that he had come here simply because a small problem had occurred in his team. His meat dumpling had broken its leg. Seeing this treatment room, Michiel immediately ran over, hurriedly helping Greedy treat his injury. Greedy also muttered inwardly, why not do something else, and instead make me pretend to go exploring? It's so embarrassing. But he didn't dare resist Yu Ran's arrangement. Seeing that Yu Ran's teammate was also injured, the bald guy felt a surge of strength, and he returned all the words that Yu Ran had used to mock him back to Yu Ran. But this didn't cause any antipathy in Yu Ran, but further affirmed his thinking. The bald guy before him was indeed exactly like himself in his previous life. It seems that these people are truly not like Zhang Kaiyu, so he must save them this time. At this moment Yu Ran said to them, if they want to survive and leave the dungeon, then join their team. But Bald Kang burst out laughing. Yu Ran's team didn't even have a tank, yet they wanted him to listen to them. This made him very uncomfortable. If that's the case, then let the two of them have a duel. Whoever wins will be the team leader. At the same time, outside the dungeon, Missile had been incredibly prominent in recent days. The names of Jiang Kaiyan and John George were dominating the front pages of major media outlets. Compared to Isaac, that name seemed about to be forgotten, but Song Jinghui of Missile believed that this was just the calm before the storm. Through the news sent back by the mole in Area A, she knew that Isaac had entered the dungeon. Although members of the guild had also participated this time, they were just external members, not part of the core at all, and they didn't know their plans either. But the Sword Saint told her to rest assured, because this time he would also intervene in the encirclement of Isaac. Hearing that the Sword Saint would act, Song Jinghui also calmed down, but to be safer, she would arrange for John George to assist the Sword Saint. It seems that Isaac's role has touched the interests of too many people, and this time they had gathered to eliminate him on the 6th floor of the dungeon, the level a dungeon, to eliminate him. After more than a month, Yu Ran's team expanded once again. With the principle of taking action instead of arguing, Yu Ran knocked down Bald Kang, successfully winning the title of Dungeon Boss, and became the leader of Bald Kang's team. The familiar scene made Li Kenqi feel a pang of regret, knowing that he had also been abused by Yu Ran in the past. And this was just the beginning of their nightmare. Very quickly, the team welcomed its first battle. Opposite them was a thick-skinned and fleshy Minotaur. Bald Kang, as the tank, could only grit his teeth and rush forward. Yu Ran's skeleton soldiers closely followed behind, taking the opportunity to attack, and Missile and Yu Ran's skeleton mage stood behind waiting for an opportunity. And at that moment, the Minotaur's heavy punch swung towards Bald Kang. With a dodge, Bald Kang not only lost his balance, but also sprained his ankle. The assassin on the team named Carl saw this and quickly rushed to the rescue, jewel daggers in hand, flying towards the Minotaur. In an instant, he left countless wounds on the opponent's body. The skeleton soldier also took the opportunity to swing its sword at the Minotaur. The close cooperation of many parties caused the Minotaur to lose its reaction. Missile and the skeleton mage launched magic attacks, while Yu Ran and Li Kenqi just stood there to the side, watching everything. Bald Kang gritted his teeth and looked towards Yu Ran. Even though he was unwilling, there was nothing he could do. Who told him he lost the bet to the other party? And at that moment, the Minotaur's giant axe suddenly smashed down next to his foot. The injured Bald Kang had no time to dodge. Seeing that he was about to be smashed into meat paste, a figure suddenly appeared, instantly pulling him out of the way. Bald Kang opened his eyes and saw that Yu Ran was holding him, a sinister smile on his lips. Could it be that you have a passion for male affection? Hurry up and put me down. Bald Kang's face was full of fear. As you wish, my little princess. Yu Ran directly released his hand and threw Bald Kang to the ground. Although he was angry in his heart, Yu Ran had saved him after all. He looked at Yu Ran turning to leave, and loudly asked him where he was going. Turning his head back, leaving behind the words to help him mop the floor, Yu Ran rushed towards the Minotaur. This time he had shocked Bald Kang. He had to know that he was just a necromancer, and there was currently no one tanking in the front. But he had no idea of Yu Ran's true strength. But this time, Yu Ran would seriously give him a lesson. Compared to the excitement in the dungeon, Wu Tan's side was indeed too comfortable. At this time he was holding a cheap cup of coffee, treating himself. And this person was the dragon hunter who killed the golden dragon. Sai Wukan, although a miser, he also had dreams. As an old friend of the dragon hunter, besides coming to see if Wukan was still alive, it was also to confirm whether his previous statement of saving the world still counted. But this time, Wu Tan had added something for him, which was that if others save me, I will definitely repay them many times over. If others harm me, I will definitely return it 100-fold. At this time in the dungeon, Yu Ran's splendid solo performance directly made Bald Kang widen his eyes. His butt also had to open its eyes. His ethereal movement and ghostly steps caused every attack of the Minotaur to be perfectly dodged by him. But what made Bald Kang even more curious was that Yu Ran only dodged and didn't launch any attacks. And at that moment, Yu Ran suddenly ran to a dead end, and the Minotaur directly rushed over. Bald Kang was shocked to see this, and Missile also nervously closed her eyes. In their eyes, Yu Ran couldn't escape this time. But Li Kenqi next to him shook his head. He knew very well that Yu Ran was about to start showing off. With a bang, Mokros, Bald Kong had already lost hope. Even the assassin next to him felt sorry for Yu Ran. In their eyes, Yu Ran was done for. The skeleton soldiers were even more hopeless. But after the smoke dissipated, Yu Ran's figure appeared once again. The long blade rotating in his hand shone with a cold light. On the contrary, the Minotaur had its horns stuck in the wall, completely losing its ability to move. And this move was Yu Ran's usual special skill, Beast Confinement. Yu Ran leapt into the air. His long blade aimed directly at the opponent's eyeball. The brown pupil in the large bull's eyes flashed helplessly. The intense pain caused the Minotaur to go berserk, using all its strength to directly pull its horn out. At this time, its whole body was emitting a red light, and it had entered a state of rage. Seeing the opponent's state clearly, Yu Ran knew that the opponent was at the end of its rope. Then the next move will be the bull-headed monster's ultimate attack. It's also the best time for Yu Ran to make his move. Yu Ran was seen continuously throwing corpses at the bull-headed monster. The raging bull-headed monster running towards them didn't pay any attention to these obstacles. Yu Ran let out a disdainful laugh, and then activated Corpse Explosion. A loud explosion caused the bull-headed monster to fall to the ground, and it also completely stunned the players around them. The Bone Sea soldiers drew their greatswords and rushed forward. They charged at the bull-headed monster, yelling loudly. Yu Ran stylishly turned around and left the battlefield, because the next battle no longer required him to take action. Since when could the goddess Song Singhui of the Misael Guild be trifled with at will? Others might endure it, but Shu couldn't. Not to mention the licking dogs behind her. As a hunting dog of Misael, the Death Knight John George, even though he didn't follow the other party's request and obtain Balumu, he still appeared to be unconcerned. As for being threatened by the licking dogs and the punishment from the guild, he couldn't care less, because he knew very well that Song Singhui would not attack him. His role was to lure Izak, that big fish. At this time in the dungeon, just as the exit of the 5th level of the dungeon had opened, Thunder Emperor's subordinates rushed up. According to the previous agreement between Yu Ran and him, this dungeon run, the members of their Solar Eagle Guild didn't need to take action, but the rewards that Yu Ran received had to be handed over to him. This unequal condition that Yu Ran dared to agree to meant that in Thunder Emperor's hands, there must be something he wanted more. After all, Yu Ran had never suffered a loss when making a move. As for the bald guys group, they were completely in the clear. He remembered, in his previous life, they fought together, and only half of them survived in the end. They were not core members of Misael to begin with, so there was no need to be buried with them. Moreover, Yu Ran had already seen them as members of his team. At the same time, in Wu Kan's office, the appearance of the Dragon Hunter was definitely not just a simple meeting of friends, but to bring a divine weapon for Wu Kan's plan to save the world. To bring a divine weapon. As the Dragon Hunter took out the equipment from his backpack, Wu Kan's eyes started to light up. If the envoy was here, he would definitely be so amazed his jaw would drop. Because what was displayed in front of Wu Kan was exactly the Balumuk they had always dreamed of. And this divine weapon was also the only sword that could kill the savior. Clearly, they could have stayed put, but they just had to seek death. With insufficient strength, they still wanted to become second in command. That dark-skinned brother has been blinded by power. According to the agreement between Yu Ran and Thunder Emperor of the Solar Eagle Guild, Yu Ran was responsible for clearing the dungeon, and the Solar Eagle Guild was responsible for collecting the spoils. But the brother leading the team this time wanted to personally deal with the dungeon boss, the two-headed one-eyed giant. After all, since entering the dungeon, his team hadn't suffered any losses. If he succeeded, he could step all over Xiaojela's position and become the second in command of the Solar Eagle. Although Yu Ran saw through his intentions, he didn't stop them, because he wasn't Lei Feng, and besides, these people from the Solar Eagle were not like the bald guy, who had a connection with him in his previous life. Regarding the departure of the Solar Eagle Guild, the bald guy was very confused. He thought that with more people they should stick together, so they could increase the success rate. Yu Ran was too lazy to explain to him, directly turning his head and going in the opposite direction to the Solar Eagle Guild. In his opinion, the way the Solar Eagle Guild was acting was like shining a light in the toilet. Yu Ran turned his head to look at Lion Hang. asking about his condition in his plan. Lion Hang needed to deal with the small monsters on this level, and the item he was using this time was the Ring of Solomon he had tricked from the Sword Saint earlier. The Ring of Solomon? The most important function of this legendary equipment was that it could control monsters of a lower level than its wielder. As Lian Hang wore the ring and activated its effect, each of the giant ants, their bodies radiating golden light, accepted Lian Hang as their boss. At this time, at the other end of the dungeon, the dark-skinned brother was facing an unprecedented crisis. He was clearly fighting the one-eyed giant, but many monsters suddenly appeared around him. After his greatsword slashed these monsters, the ones who fell were his own teammates. The dark-skinned brother was confused, but he didn't have time to think anymore, because the one-eyed giant was already behind him, and what was about to greet him was a fist as big as a cooking pot. Yuran was truly a master of all dungeons. With 2 lifetimes of experience, he knew the rules of every boss in the dungeon very well. At this time, in the 5th level of the dungeon, the bald guy still had doubts about Yuran's plan. Although currently Lian Hang was relying on the Ring of Solomon to control a bunch of small ants, but the ring's effect was limited in duration. It was possible that they would lose control during the fight. The bald guy's doubts were not unreasonable, but who was Yuran, a master of all dungeons? How could he not have thought of this? He originally did not want to use these ants to kill the boss, but rather to stall for time for the opponent's cooldown. That's right. The reason the one-eyed giant became a nightmare for countless players was because his 2 eyes, painted with eyeliner, had different abilities. Among them, the left eye could cause a chaotic effect, causing the opponent to lose the ability to distinguish between friend and foe. Although the ant army had a large number, they couldn't kill the opponent, relying on the chaotic ability of the left eye. When the ants started biting each other, even if the Ring of Solomon lost its effect, it wouldn't be able to stop them from slaughtering each other. And this kind of situation was what Yuran wanted to see. Because when the ants were all eliminated, the one-eyed giant's left eye was about to finish its cooldown, and its other eye couldn't pose any threat to Yuran at all. Without waiting for Baldy to react, Yuran had already stepped forward. The one-eyed giant's right eye effect was immediately activated, and its ability was petrification. And he was nailed in place, but the corners of his mouth still maintained a slight upturn. And the petrification of the human in front of it made the one-eyed giant lower its guard. And this was the moment Yuran had been waiting for. Following a flash of golden light on his hand, by activating the anti-petrification effect, Yuran jumped up, and the longsword in his hand aimed straight for the opponent's right foot. With a whoosh, the longsword pierced the giant's right eye. The intense pain made the giant swing its fist and punch towards Yuran, but Yuran at this time was no longer the weak summoner he was at the beginning. Now he was a wielder of many divine artifacts. In the thick fog, a golden light flashed, and thanks to the effect of the Aegis shield, Yuran easily blocked the opponent's punch. Those watching from afar now understood Yuran's skills and began activating their skills to join the battle. The one-eyed giant had now lost its biggest trump card, and the remaining finishing touches didn't require Yuran to act at all. Whether District A is in chaos or not, Thunder Emperor decides. It took a lot of effort to get the one-eyed giant, and once the Devil Eye appeared, the dungeon would be in their hands. Surrounded by a group of sturdy men holding real guns, the hot-tempered Baldy immediately became anxious. What was Mighty Dao's group doing with guns? If they had the guts, they should take off their pants and have a fight. Hearing this, Sia Giala standing behind Thunder Emperor seemed a little impatient. He advised Baldy's group to leave quickly and not hinder their deal with Isaac. Hearing Sia Giala's mockery, Michelle was a little agitated. After all, they were the ones who explored the dungeon. It seemed too unkind to treat them this way. But Thunder Emperor didn't care that much. A deal is a deal. Moreover, he was the local power here. As soon as the gun was loaded, everyone was shocked. Thunder Emperor walked leisurely towards Yuran. Although he didn't bring his subordinates out, there was no stipulation in the contract that Yuran had to worry about their lives. As long as he brought the item out, that was enough. Yuran agreed expressionlessly. Lai Jihua behind him was also a little surprised. When did such a cheapskate become so easy to talk to? But even if he was unwilling in his heart, There was nothing he could do. Who told Yu Ran to be his boss? Moreover, he didn't know Yu Ran's plan either. Watching Thunder Emperor and his group leave, the people from the Mizir Guild also stepped forward to thank Yu Ran for going down the dungeon with him, which had benefited them greatly. It could be said that Baldy was like a glowing boiled egg standing in place, muttering. Seeing this scene, Yu Ran smiled and stepped forward. Honestly, he wasn't a good team leader. Hearing this, Baldy was just about to get angry when Yu Ran continued. But in the future, his teammates would definitely trust him and support him because after all, for them, he was also an excellent teammate. Hearing this, Baldy ignored his pride and immediately grabbed Yu Ran's outstretched hand, leading them to leave. Yu Ran smiled and comforted them. He couldn't protect them well in his past life, and in this life, he would absolutely not let Mizir harm them. At the same time, the news of Yu Ran leaving the dungeon was being widely publicized by the media, and this creation of public opinion all stemmed from the hands of a woman. At this time, Song Sing-oi could no longer restrain herself. Eliminating the character Izak had become urgent. To prevent accidents from happening, this time she even took out legendary equipment deal. With benefits for both sides, only Yu Ran dared to carry out this kind of operation. According to the agreement with Thunder Emperor, Yu Ran smoothly obtained the corpse summoning skill. Although the process was a bit convoluted, the deal was still considered satisfactory. Of course, these things Yu Ran reported in detail to Lei Rongguan. After all, Thunder Emperor's connection was also made by him. Of course, this didn't mean that Yu Ran was afraid of the other party. On the contrary, he thought it would be easier to grasp Lei Rongguan this way. Indeed, as he had predicted, Lei Rongguan was very satisfied after hearing Yu Ran's report. At least he thought that the kid in front of him wouldn't dare deceive him. Little did he know that he had already been spun around in Yu Ran's trap. Lei Rongguan wanted Yu Ran to continue monitoring Thunder Emperor. And at the same time, there was another matter that Yu Ran needed to accomplish. Speaking of this, the door creaked open, and the female secretary with her sexy little waist walked in. Lei Rongguan arranged for the other party to place the items on the table, and then said to Yu Ran, "This was a gift for Isaac." Yu Ran curiously opened the box, and inside was the Osiris ring. Although he didn't know what this ring was like right now, but looking at Yu Ran's expression, it was certain that this item was very suitable for him to use. Of course, he couldn't take the item for free, on the condition that, in the next dungeon, he had to kill John George. That's right, previously the Mizir Guild paved the way, and specially contacted Lei Rongguan requesting that Isaac and John George enter the 6th floor dungeon together. The cooperation seemed perfect, but in reality both sides had their own plans. Putting the ring away, Yu Ran agreed readily. Because even without Lei Rongguan's arrangement, he would have had a confrontation, and now that he also got a ring, wasn't it exactly what he wanted? The scene changes. When they reach the Bitch Go wall, Yu Ran and John George arrange to meet on the day to enter the dungeon. The two greet each other in front of the media. "It's an honor to be working with you." John George proactively greets Yu Ran first. Hearing this, Yu Ran scoffs. He understands the other party's purpose very well. But since the other party wants to put on a show for the media, then he will play out this whole act with him. After shaking hands with John George, he immediately turns and leaves. But these actions, in John George's eyes, are seen as the other party looking down on him. But thinking about eliminating the other party in the upcoming dungeon, John George no longer cares. As soon as they enter the dungeon, Yu Ran is reasonably killing small monsters. When John George cheerfully comes up, "Your strength truly lives up to the name. To be able to raise the combat power of each bone soldier to this extent, it seems I still have a lot to learn from you." Yu Ran naturally doesn't think the other party is praising him, but on the contrary, is showing off, both being dark apostles. John George has always been famous for his numbers. That's right. The number of bone soldiers he summons is several times that of Yu Ran. Speaking of this, the smile on John George's face becomes even more radiant. It's all thanks to this ring. This is the Ring of Hades. John George raises his right hand, seemingly showing off to Yu Ran. After seeing the ring, Yu Ran's heart jumps, because he is very clear about the effect of this ring. It can easily take other people's bone soldiers and make them their own. Yu Ran also did not expect that the other party would have this heaven-defying artifact. At this moment, John George continues to make small talk. Don't worry, I absolutely have no intention of touching your bone soldiers. The bone soldiers that I use are all summoned by my subordinates behind me. Though that's what he says, the threatening tone in John George's voice is not hidden at all. Moreover, there's even more disbelief. Yu-Ran understands this very well. He has to admit, this person before him is truly a dangerous threat that cannot be underestimated. Because whether in his past life or in the present, John George is a frighteningly bold enemy. How intense will the confrontation between two necromancers be? The very act of becoming a hidden class is already a rare existence. Yu-Ran and John George's methods, if not 1,000, then there must be 800. 11 days pass without incident. It's not that John George doesn't want to act, but he has set the place to assassinate the other party at the final level. The purpose is to preserve his strength in the previous 5 levels and try for a one-hit kill. In fact, as soon as Yu-Ran entered the dungeon, seeing the ring in John George's hand, he understood that this time the Miser Guild had taken a ruthless approach. When Yu-Ran opens the 5th floor door, it means that the decisive battle is about to begin. Following a flash of light, everyone arrives at a desert, and not far away is a dense forest. John George cunningly originally intended to lure Yu-Ran into the forest to finish him, but unexpectedly, Yu-Ran directly exposed the other party's purpose. Seeing that his conspiracy had been exposed, John George directly orders his bone soldiers to rush towards the other party. The corners of Yu-Ran's mouth reveal a playful smile. He had long anticipated this situation. The bone soldiers under his command directly protect the front, blocking the opponent's attacks. The next second, Yu-Ran turns and runs away. Evenly too, and is stunned. John George's subordinates want to give chase, but they are stopped by John George. He knows very well chasing after Yu-Ran is pointless. The most important thing right now is to control the demonic entities under his command, the Dullahan and the Bone Mage. It must be said that John George's EQ is very high, and he also reacts very quickly. In the dungeon, bone soldiers can be summoned infinitely, but as for stone statues, Dullahan and other special groups are different. If these summons are destroyed by John George, or used with the Hades ring to control them, then Yu-Ran's combat power will definitely be greatly reduced. But for these issues, Yu-Ran has long had a plan in mind. As he rushes towards the forest, he summons the Book of the Dead, a reverse summon, directly pulling back his special individual summons. This is something that John George did not expect. At this time, his subordinates suggest going to catch Yu-Ran, but they are directly rejected by John George. Yu-Ran still has most of his combat power right now, and rushing into the forest recklessly is no different from seeking death. But even if they don't chase into the forest, Yu-Ran has already come up with countermeasures. And the key to breaking the situation is the biggest boss in this dungeon. To cause chaos in a dangerous dungeon, besides having absolute strength, one must also have superior intelligence. John George's equipment may restrain Yu-Ran's summoning magic, but Yu-Ran is a step higher. Wearing the Osiris ring on his hand, Yu-Ran has absolute certainty. Speaking of this ring, even Li Tuan doesn't know its effect. After hunting down a wyvern, Li Tuan also truly witnessed what a heaven-defying artifact is. The greatest effect of the Osiris ring is that it can revive dead creatures. A dazzling purple light erupts. The wyvern opens its huge wings and lets out a roar. A pair of eyes look into the eerie purple light, making Li Tuan stare blankly. A cool mount like this, he doesn't dare dream of. And this is just the beginning of Yu-Ran's plan. Waiting until night falls, the Sphinx is enjoying a delicious dinner, and at this moment, an uninvited guest suddenly interrupted its meal. And this person was none other than Yu-Ran and Liken riding a wyvern. Although Yu-Ran had prepared for it, he didn't expect the opponent's speed to be so fast. One gulp, one spit, one open, one close, almost killing the wyvern under their crotches on the spot. Controlling the wyvern, Yu-Ran immediately turned around. And at this moment, Yu-Ran also found his target, which was the firelight in the forest. It doesn't take a genius to guess that this fire was from George's team. Yu-Ran controlled the wyvern, quickly flying towards the firelight. The lion-headed humanoid monster chased closely behind. That's right, Yu-Ran wanted to use a borrowed sword to kill, leading the boss into George's camp. As the two approached their target, Yu-Ran suddenly grabbed Ken and with a leap jumped off the wyvern's back. And at this moment, the huge mouth of the lion-headed humanoid monster bit down hard on the wyvern's neck. It must be said, Yu-Ran controlled the timing extremely well. Thanks to the inertia, the lion-headed humanoid monster charged straight into George's camp. The moment he saw the opponent, George's eyes were filled with shock. Even though he had countless skeletal soldiers, before the large figure of the lion-headed humanoid monster, they became small and insignificant. With no preparation at all, he encountered the final boss of the dungeon. George had no chance of winning. In just a moment, all of George's skeletal soldiers were wiped out, and even his subordinates suffered more than half casualties. Although George managed to escape with his life thanks to a treasure, he also lost his advantage in confronting Yu-Ran. What's more deadly is, with his current strength, the dungeon was basically unassailable. Instead of that, it was better to directly kill Yu-Ran, and at this time, it was time for him to reveal his trump card. That was the assassin lurking in the shadows. In order to kill Isaac in the dungeon, he had intentionally prepared 2 hands. On the surface, it was John George wearing the Hades ring, but now the skeletal soldiers he was proud of were almost completely wiped out by Yu-Ran using the lion-headed humanoid monster. And behind him, Song Xinghui also invited the Sword Saint. That's right, all along. The Sword Saint was wearing the Hades helmet, lurking in the dungeon. The effect of the helmet could help the user activate an invisibility effect, but the drawback was that they couldn't communicate or eat. Now, George no longer had the strength to confront Yu-Ran. He could only call the Sword Saint for help. According to the previous plan, George would hold Yu-Ran back, while the Sword Saint would be responsible for the sneak attack. But as soon as the Sword Saint took off his helmet, George suddenly shouted out Isaac's name. The Sword Saint thought that the opponent had found a flaw, and turned his head to look back. But in that very instant, the Hades helmet in his hand was snatched away by George. Even a fool could tell. George hated the Sword Saint, his eyes glaring at the opponent. The longsword also appeared in his hand in an instant, but George grinned and looked towards reality. Since he had prepared for betrayal, how could he not have any tricks up his sleeve? Surrounded by countless skeletal soldiers, the Sword Saint had to face not only George. On the other side, Yu-Ran led Liken through the forest, marking the way, while scouting. Liken didn't quite understand what Yu-Ran was doing, but he said that guests would soon come looking for them. Before he finished speaking, a figure emerged from afar. This person was George, who had betrayed them earlier. He simply tossed a helmet to Yu-Ran. After seeing the equipment on the ground, Yu-Ran called out its name, Hades helmet. George didn't expect the opponent to recognize this equipment. He thought someone had informed him beforehand. But little did he know that from the moment he entered the dungeon, Yu-Ran had already calculated these things. Only the Hades helmet was something he hadn't anticipated. The reason he could call out his name was because he had seen this equipment in his previous life. Yu-Ran calmly looked at George. Why are you giving this to me? George closed his eyes, his expression nonchalant. You won. This is a gift I'm giving to the winner. I surrender to you, but you must guarantee my safety, including outside the dungeon. As expected of someone chosen to be a hidden player, George indeed had a superior IQ. He could see that staying by Nicel's side would not end well for him, so this time he decided to betray. In fact, more importantly, he originally thought he could kill the Sword Saint, but he didn't expect the opponent's strength to be too great, and his skeletal soldiers were all defeated. Of course, in terms of IQ, Yu-Ran was also not inferior to the opponent. Because he wanted to seek help, then the Hades ring had to be kept. George didn't expect Yu-Ran to be so careful, but now, he basically had no cards left to negotiate with the opponent. He could only give the ring to Yu-Ran. At the same time, at the other end of the dungeon, the Sword Saint was running quickly through the forest. It was hard enough to deal with George's skeletal soldiers, but he unexpectedly encountered a monster. Having not eaten for over 20 days, the Sword Saint was almost exhausted. Moreover, this was after all the 6th floor of the dungeon. Being alone here, even survival was a problem, let alone killing the boss. Thinking through all of this, the Sword Saint decided to go find Yu-Ran. Even if he died, he would drag someone down with him. Faced with the oncoming monster, the Sword Saint no longer confronted it, but activated the special effect on his shoes, and his entire body shot forward. Night fell. Lycan was both peeing and complaining. Why in this world? Is there no equipment that doesn't trick people? He suddenly felt a cold wind blowing towards his crotch. And by the time he saw the opponent clearly, a blazing red figure appeared before him. Before he could even speak, the opponent's sword had already flashed across his body. And this person was none other than the Sword Saint, burning with rage.